Committee Room 29, signed. 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 Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound.
Okay, so I'm just going to provide a brief overview of today's business. The committee will receive oral evidence from Northern Ireland Electricity on the electric vehicle public charging infrastructure. We're to receive oral evidence on the January monitoring round from the Department for Infrastructure. Receive an oral evidence session from the Department of Infrastructure on their 2024-2025 business plan, quarter 1 and quarter 2 monitoring. Going to consider written evidence on the Living with Water in Derry Londonderry plan consultation. Consider written evidence on the review of the Trust Ports public consultation. Consider 2 proposals for statutory rules subject to assembly procedure, and consider 2 statutory rules and 2 proposals for statutory rules that are not subject to assembly procedure. So, welcome everybody to the first committee session of 2025. We're looking forward to getting delved into all the different arts and parts of infrastructure again this year. So I just want to inform those in attendance, anybody in the public gallery can use mobile devices through a Wi-Fi connection, and all devices should be muted. 3G, 4G and 5G should not be used, and no recordings or photographs are to be taken during the meeting. So if members are content, we'll proceed through the agenda as follows. Apologies. Is Cahill? Is he coming? Yeah. It's okay. And then we have Mark joining online. Declarations of interest or remind members that they are obliged to declare any relevant financial or other interests which might reasonably be thought by others to influence their approach to the matter under consideration. Any members who have interest to declare in relation to today's business should do so now or when the particular matter arises in the meeting. So does any members have any interest they wish to declare? No? Okay, thank you. Chairperson's business. I suppose just at the outset of the meeting, I do want to raise one issue, and that's just in relation to the amount of people that lost their lives on our roads last year. And I know from a committee perspective, we're very keen to make sure that we see 0 road deaths on our roads. 68 people lost their lives on our roads in Northern Ireland last year, and we want to send our sympathies to those families who have lost a loved one. And I want it to be a very firm commitment that we want to ensure that road safety will be a priority, and that we will see implementation of the road safety plan as well in relation to it. So I just wanted to say that at the outset of the meeting. Item 4 is the draft minutes. At your table papers at page 3, you'll see the draft minutes of proceedings of the meeting on the 11th of December 2024. So I'm seeking agreement that members are content that the minutes are a true and accurate reflection of the meeting on the 11th of December 2024. And if so, I'll sign the minutes. Content, yeah. Okay, thank you. Item 5 is matters arising. So at page 9, you will see Minister for Infrastructure, Environment and Rural Affairs responds to committee request for the Northern Ireland Environment Agency to present evidence on issues regarding NI water. Excuse me. My members have, following the committee's previous agreement to schedule oral evidence with NI Water and NIEA, committee staff have been engaging with the relevant organisations for this to occur at the same meeting. Members, you will recall that NIEA had previously indicated that it would not be in a position to attend the committee's meeting originally scheduled for today, the 15th of January, and no alternative dates had been proposed. As a result, at its last meeting, the committee agreed to write to the Minister for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs requesting that he encourages NIEA officials to attend and assist the committee in undertaking its scrutiny role. In his response, the Minister highlights the need to respect the mandate of the Committee for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, and is undertaken to provide a written briefing in the first instance. In noting the Minister's comment and to avoid duplication, obviously as a committee we might want to consider how we proceed. It is with a slight bit of disappointment from myself, but I understand in terms of where the Minister is coming from in terms of the committee point of view. So I'm happy for people to come in, but I thought maybe proposing that the committee ourselves write to the Committee for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs to outline the committee's interest in hearing from NIEA and to request whether we wish to receive oral evidence from NIEA following receipt of the written briefing as referenced by the Minister, and then also a copy of the written briefing once it's been given by NIEA. How do members feel in relation to that, Keith? Is you're indicating?
So I'm looking at the last paragraph, so we have to sort of wait to the Derry committee decide whether they're going to take oral evidence. So writing to them would be the best, because we don't want that to go on for months. So they're going to get written, we're going to get a copy of that, and we have to wait to see if they're going to have oral before we get the oral. So I would.
And then NIEA are going to give a written to the Agriculture Committee?
Yeah, so the Minister's indicated he'd be writing to the Committee for Agriculture in the first instance with a view with the Agriculture Committee to determine whether they want to take oral evidence. What the Chairperson's proposing is to try and expedite that, to write to the Committee for Agriculture to establish if they plan to take oral evidence, because they may not, and then to avoid duplication, that may then provide an opportunity for the committee to then address that.
Yeah. So, is intent with that?
Yeah, so we write to and get.
Yeah. Like, it is important because we do need to scrutinise this, and I can't stress that enough. You know, we have heard in the briefing sessions that we have had, NIEA keep coming up in relation to what Northern Ireland Water said, and there's no point in us having NI Water in again until we hear from NIEA in relation to the policy side of things as well. Andrew, were you looking at?
Just to clarify on what was said, what the proposing then is to communicate from this committee to the Derry committee, and then sort of liaise with them as to how they're proceeding, and
pretty much,
and go that road. That sounds.
Yeah. So
committee to committee then, really, isn't it?
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah. All right. So I'm taking a broad agreement then with that approach. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, item 6 is correspondence. So at page 13 you'll see the correspondence memo. At page 27 you'll see Minister for Infrastructure flooding from Storm Bert response. So I'm seeking agreement to request details of the proposed pilot for the new software under the environmental maintenance contract when available. At page 48 you'll see Minister for Infrastructure. Oh, sorry, is everyone content with that? I was just rattling on.
Slow down, Chair. It's a new year now, but just slow down in each hand there. Okay.
It's a democracy, not a dictatorship. So are you happy with that? Yeah. Okay, thank you. At page 48 is Minister for Infrastructure review of planning, development management regulations, Northern Ireland 2015 response. I'm seeking agreement to write to the department to seek the proposed options prior to the Minister's consideration, to allow the committee to express its view on these options before any final decision is taken. Happy with that? At page 55, you'll see the Minister for Infrastructure Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Task Force scope to utilise financial transaction capital funding and the response in relation to that. I think it might be good just to try and check in on the smart meters and the discussions that are happening in relation to the economy department, just in relation to that, because that has come up in some of the discussions we've had. Is there anything else that members want to add to that? Or are you happy with that? Okay. Then at page 65, Minister for Infrastructure Traffic Congestion in Belfast response. So I'm seeking agreement to write to DFI to request further information on the outcome of the roundtable meeting with key stakeholders held on Monday the 16th of December 2024 and a further update on the meeting held on Friday the 20th of December 2024. Now obviously there will have been press in relation to that, but just to get detail from our point of view in relation to that. And then the second item I'm looking just to seek agreement on is the progress of collective communication strategy. He's happy with those? Keith was indicating first, and then I'll come to you.
How far are you going to stray into that topic today with Colin Woods? You know, because Boyne Bridge is going to, we could be in the middle of Belfast City Centre before you know it. You know, how far are we going to go there today?
Yeah. So we'll come to it later in the discussion, but I would quite like to see TransLink coming up to the committee as soon as possible to understand and get further detail in relation to what has happened there with the likes of the Boyne Bridge. There's media this morning in relation to that, but also to understand, I was also hoping to get some detail around what their plans were now that the hub is in place, and further expansion of public transport. But there are other issues there in relation to the traffic and how I suppose those things have interconnected. So I'm sort of hoping that we get TransLink up to the committee as soon as possible to try and discuss those issues. In terms, Colin Woods is up, and I would like to try and ask some questions when Colin Woods is up in relation to some of the things to do with traffic congestion over Christmas. So we'll play it by ear whether he will take those questions today, but if not, we will follow up with the department on that. Happy enough, Keith?
Yep, fine, thanks.
Peter?
Yeah, it was just to include, maybe a question about, is there any data about the changes that were made over that period? Did they have any actual impact?
Yeah.
Just if there's any data, do you include that in the response as well?
Yeah, funny, that was one of the notes I'd taken as well, was just to see, in terms of public messaging around taking public transport, how that compare. It might be difficult to actually see how that has worked, with the increase of the nighttime services and things, which seems to have worked very well. And we've seen a press statement from TransLink saying that they're hoping to try and keep that on. So that was why I wanted to get TransLink up as well, to try and see, so...
Specifically on the congestion, did it actually reduce the congestion?
Yeah.
And I suppose I'm coming at it from the taxi perspective, being permitted in the bus lanes. I did media on it, and they were quite surprised. The two of us were saying from the same hymn sheet. They were saying, this is a lot of changes, but it's very last minute. So what were the changes that were made? Did they actually impact upon the congestion in any positive way? Okay. I don't know about that.
Yep. Okay, happy with that? Okay, thank you. At page 73, you'll see Minister for Infrastructure Industrial Staff Sickness Response. I'm seeking agreement to request data on the proportion of absences that were work-related and the proportion of absences that were long-term within each of the reasons cited for sickness absences in industrial staff. Happy with that? At page 100, Committee for Finance, potential equality impacts of the draft budget for 2025-2026. Seeking agreement to respond to the Committee for Finance to highlight that no information has been received to date. Okay, happy with that? Yeah. At page 48, you'll see the Utility Regulator, Northern Ireland PC21 Enforcement, Northern Ireland Water Response. I'm just seeking agreement at this stage to note that and include that in the briefing by when we come to the NI Water piece, once scheduled in the work programme, if you're content with that. Okay, at page 180, TransLink, again, you'll see traffic congestion in and around Belfast City Centre response. So I think we've probably discussed, hopefully, what we plan to do in relation to that and have TransLink come up to the committee, if you're content with that, or if there's any other issues you want to raise just specifically to that piece of correspondence. Content? Okay, so I'm asking members if they wish to comment or raise any other issue on any other item of correspondence that's in the meeting pack. Yep, Peter?
On page 44, Chair, the Minister said about in the current financial year 20.7 million has been allocated to active travel capital projects, and I think that's a real increase in terms of, I think in previous years it's been as low as 3 million, so that's to be welcomed. My concern is that it's a lot of money that we're maybe not going to be able to spend within 1 year. So from an East Belfast perspective, I'm thinking about on Montgomery Road, for example. That was consulted on over a year ago and they haven't been able to progress it. On the Ravenhill Road, I think there was an engagement piece in May 24, hasn't progressed either. So my concern is, looking at that 20 million figure, it's not going to be able to be spent in terms of active travel delivery. So can we write back to the Minister to get a bit of clarity as to where that money may be going or where it's earmarked for that year?
So with the finance officials up today, it might be worth maybe raising that during our finance session with the officials today, because they might be able to give you some detail just in relation to where that
it is quite precise in terms of the active travel piece. So totally take your point, but can we maybe write back to him to maybe get cast iron in writing answers in terms of the active travel delivery? I'll raise it with the finance officials, absolutely, but maybe just a short message back to the Minister would be helpful.
Okay, well, do you want to raise it, see if the answer comes back from the officials, because they are the people that are sort of dealing with where the money goes to and that type of thing. So if you want to raise it with them, if you don't feel that you've got a satisfactory response, we can then raise that in any other business. If you want to take a note of that, and we can come back to that. Are you happy enough with that? Thank you. Mark?
Thank you, Chair. Just on that point that Peter raised, I do think that's important that we know, like, sort of where the money's being spent and what it's being spent on exactly. I think that is important. And another piece of correspondence there, it's related to the regulatory framework for taxis.
Yeah.
Page 39, I think. Right, and I mean, we've a letter back. We'd obviously written to the Minister with specific regard to the wedding car and funeral car industry. And just to note that I think it's quite significant, the Minister's come back and says, at the very end of the letter, I have agreed to carry out a review of the Taxis Act 2008, subject to availability of staff and resources. Well, that's a complete U-turn, because the Minister's been saying there's nothing to see here and there's no need for a review. So we welcome that sort of Damascene conversion. However, I would be keen to explore then what staff and resources are required, what's the current availability, and what is the requirement? Do we ensure that it actually happens?
Yeah, 100%, Mark. I totally agree with you that it is a change in position, because, as you know, through the committee, we've been raising this in terms of the review. So it's good to see that is included, but we want to see that actually happening. So it would be good to obviously get those that information from the department, so we'll certainly do that. Did anybody want to raise anything else? Keith, yeah.
Page 17, you know, the correspondence awaiting response document, which is a good document. I'm looking at MenCap and the response times. At what point do we stop? And we're using MenCap to be fair as an example. At what point do we stop saying, we've asked 3 times, we're not asking again?
Good question. I suppose it's disappointing because we're trying to get information which will ultimately help people, you know. So I would far rather have somebody come back and say, look, I don't have this information, than have no response at all. So I don't know whether we do one last ditch attempt effort and reiterate just the point that, you know, this is a committee trying to help help people within your organisation. and make that point to them.
Only a general point. I know Mencap's at the top of the list, but it's many times they ask, they just say, okay, park it.
And maybe in that correspondence we should actually say, if you do not hold that information, that's okay, but we would like to know whether you do or not, because it'll be no reflection on the organisation. It's just we need to know from a committee perspective these issues are not going away. So we want to try and help in terms of that situation, so it's a fair point to raise. But maybe what we'll do is that last ditch attempt effort, if members are content with that. All right. Okay, thank you. So just to tie everything together, I'm seeking agreement that members are content to note the correspondence and suggested actions as contained in the correspondence memo in the meeting pack. Content? Yeah. Okay, we'll now move on to item 7, which is the electric vehicle public charging infrastructure Northern Ireland electricity oral evidence. At page 196, you'll see the clerk's memo, EV charging infrastructure Northern Ireland electricity networks. You'll see at page 200 a briefing paper on the barriers faced in increasing the capacity of charging infrastructure for electric vehicles. So we welcome into the committee today Derek Hines, Managing Director, Adele Creary, Customer and Market Services Director, and Andrew Couples, Network Development Manager. You're very, very welcome to the Committee for Infrastructure today. We're looking forward to hearing your evidence. We do obviously have your written evidence that you provided to the committee, which is really, really useful. So if you don't mind, if you could just outline in 5 minutes, because I'm keen to come to members' questions to sort of extrapolate that evidence out further. So I'll let you take the floor now.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning, committee members. We really welcome the opportunity to speak with you today, and we have been following the submissions over the last few months from DFI, EVANI and the Franchise Dealer Association as well. Just to set out where we are the owner of the electricity infrastructure in Northern Ireland. We connect about 929,000 homes and businesses to that electricity network. We're regulated by the utility regulator, and the utility regulator has recently approved our RP7 plan, which sets out our work programmes and the revenues that we're allowed to generate between now and 2031, and that totals about £2.3 billion of investment. You've heard in previous session that it is forecast that there will be 300,000 electric vehicles in Northern Ireland by 2030. The uptake to date has been slower. I think that's accepted by everybody. In general, we have work programmes approved by the utility regulator so that we can build overall network capacity to cater for an increase in demand for electricity, both from electric vehicles and other things like industry or heat pumps, as we meet or attempt to meet our climate change targets. Again, for clarity, NIE networks have no role in building, installing or operating public or domestic electric vehicle charging points. Hopefully we'll be able to help you understand our role and the different approaches that we have for the different types of commercial or high power on-street charging versus our role in facilitating the connection of domestic electric vehicle charging. And I guess there are two issues that are often raised as barriers to uptake of electric vehicles. The first one is the cost of obtaining an electricity connection for a commercial charging station, which you would have heard about, and the length of time to obtain a quote, design and connection from NIE networks. Hopefully we'll be able to explain how this works. For domestic premises, we have a fit and inform process, which basically means that the homeowner can install an electric vehicle charger in their home, 7 kilowatts, and just tell us afterwards, so there is no barrier really. In general, then we will carry out work on the network to make sure that there's sufficient capacity, safety and reliability in that local area. The bigger issue tends to be for larger scale commercial charging installations where an application for connection must be made to NIE. From there, we designed a connecting network and any network upgrades to allow that commercial operator to connect to the electricity network. We quote the customer, we do a design, and then we normally build the connection and do any other upgrades that are required in the wider network. The cost of this network connection is calculated by NIE Networks in line with the connection charging policy set by DFE and UR, which is subject to consultation and calls for evidence, and change appears to be imminent in that. Two additional points we'd like to highlight today, which are really around building standards and public safety. One is that we believe for all new build homes, the building standards should ensure that all of those homes have an electric vehicle charger either installed or that the home is ready for installation of an EV charger. And then the other point we'd like to make, which is really a public safety one, is that there is a relative disparity here around legal and technical standards that ensure that EV chargers installed in existing homes are done to an appropriate quality and safety standard. So when we look at legislation around Great Britain in particular, Northern Ireland is at a relative disadvantage compared to those locations. We believe that these areas, when addressed, will support homeowners in new homes in their decision to purchase an electric vehicle, and will provide comfort to existing homeowners that the work required to install an EV charger in their home will be done so safely. So I think we're happy to take questions.
Super, that's perfect. Thank you very much. Just following on there in terms of disparity from the legal and technical standards, have you had any direct correspondence yourselves in terms of what needs to be done to sort that issue out with departments here in Northern Ireland?
So what we're doing at the minute is pulling together a paper for the Department of Finance, who we believe are the owner of the building standards in Northern Ireland, to set out the difference between the standards expected in England, Scotland, Wales and in the Republic of Ireland, and what happens here in Northern Ireland. And there are various different legislative and technical standards in place in those jurisdictions. They're partially in place here, but not fully. What we're finding when we are carrying out work on our network to make sure that there's sufficient capacity and safety is that the installations happening on the customer premises are not in line with what we would see as best practice in other jurisdictions. So there is a risk of damage to the customer property, damage to NIE Networks property, and I guess there's a public safety concern both in terms of the people carrying out the installation and potential fire risk if not done appropriately. So lots of work has been done in different jurisdictions to tighten all that up. We're at a really good time in Northern Ireland now before we really hit that big ramp up in domestic charge point installation to clarify all of that. So the commitment that we've made to our board is that by the end of January we will have a position with the Department of Finance to try and explain that in as much detail as we can.
Okay. Look forward to seeing some of that as well. Will that be publicly available or, yeah?
We've no issue sharing that with the committee here. Yeah.
Super, that would be perfect. Just in terms of your forecast, by 2031, you've said that 300,000 electric vehicles will be in use in Northern Ireland, which will be primarily charged at domestic homes. So how have you reached this figure?
So we've probably reached that figure in conjunction with DFE in terms of the forecasting that was done to support the climate change legislation that went through. So that's broadly accepted as the likely trajectory in Northern Ireland. Andrew and his team were probably more involved in that at the time. So I don't know if you want
to... No, sure. Like there was a number of sources that fed into that, like the STEER report that the Department for Infrastructure commissioned was a key input to that. The Committee for Climate Change, their kind of recommendations and direction for Northern Ireland fed into that as well. We looked at things like historic trends across the UK, across Ireland and in Northern Ireland, which all kind of fed into that kind of high level number, and that's what we believe needs to be connected to meet ultimately to meet the net zero legislation. We then kind of took that, so we have that 300,000 at the macro level for Northern Ireland. what we then do with that is we kind of run that through our models, and we take that to a more granular level of forecast to work out, right, in terms of the different regions, how many vehicles does that translate to in Belfast and County Antrim, County Fermanagh, the different areas, and then that feeds into how we invest in the network to facilitate the uptake then.
Okay. So then, in terms of the forecasting that you've taken in relation to the VETS legislation and that scheme in terms of the targets, so in terms of the targets with that scheme, what it sets is that vehicle manufacturers on a number of new electric vehicles sold in the UK will rise to 100% in 2035. So again, what forecasting have you done yourselves beyond that 2031 forecasting that you've done as a result of that scheme here in Northern Ireland?
Yeah, I can talk to that as well. Yeah, look, our forecast 300,000 figure is our kind of 2031 figure, but that's kind of a point. Our trajectory and our trends, extend right out to 2050. Obviously, tying in with the net zero legislation, and our forecasts project forward to that point in time, and the VETS standard and legislation will feed into that as well.
Ultimately, we expect that every car in Northern Ireland will be an EV in 2050. So the way that we plan our network, there are three sort of components of money. We have an overall allowance from the regulator to build overall network capacity. We have what's called a low carbon technology allowance, which then allows us to go into specific local communities if there is a real uptake in that area and do specific local work. And then we have connection policy, which means that the large commercial charge point operators come, seek connection, and then they pay for it. So they're the three pots of money. And all of those, in terms of our regulatory allowances, our revenues and our work programmes, are projected out RP7, RP8, RP9, which brings us out to 2050. So
the grid, although it's not totally a consideration of this committee, but it is obviously feeds in, overlap in relation to the increase of electric vehicle that will be on the system. So what concerns do you have in relation to that increase and your grid capacity? Because it may differ obviously in different areas, particularly also when you're looking at that commercial side of things as well, where there's also as part of that scheme lorries, trailers, trucks, all of that type of thing, and getting electrification of vehicles. So how does that impact, and what concerns or opportunities do you see in relation to the grid system?
So I guess we really believe that electric vehicle uptake is a means of us being able to absorb a lot of the wind that's being generated in Northern Ireland. So right now an awful lot of wind energy, particularly at night time, is switched off because there isn't demand for that electricity. So heat pumps and electric vehicle charging, if done right, allow us at an overall macro grid level to absorb more renewables and get us closer to our 2030, 2040, 2050 targets. So in general, it's a really good thing. At a transmission level, the 275 kV and 110,000 volt lines, electric vehicle charging doesn't have a massive impact because it's tends to be dotted all over the place. And even the large scale connections aren't necessarily big enough to cause issues for the network that Sony designs and operates. When it comes to a charge point operator wanting 1.5 megawatts in Banbridge, it may be that there is a specific local capacity issue in Banbridge. But under our licence, we are obliged to provide a connection, and that obliges us then to be able to build the capacity and the local connection to that asset. And that's where charge point operators feel the frustration of having to wait for us to acquire a site to build a substation, us to get planning permission to build the lines to the substation, us to get an easement then to put the cable in the road to connect to the substation. So all of those different components have to happen. And there's a price aspect to that, there's a time aspect to that. But I guess there's no one-size-fits-all answer for everywhere on the network. Now, we do have capacity maps available, and then we do work very closely with TransLink and others to try to understand and get, as best as we can, a view as to what's coming in the future. A couple of stats, like we had 165 large applications in the last 2 years for big kind of main road, motorway level charging stations. Like 50% of them didn't go ahead because of either cost or time or other issues. So it's like we totally accept the fact that in specific locations, a cumulative effect of these issues can be frustrating for the people who are trying to build those charging points.
I was just going to add to that. I mean, the big frustration for us is not being able to meet customer expectations. And if we think of councils and that they have their own net zero ambitions and they have their own plans, and this may be all wrapped up in that. So for us, we've been looking very closely in terms of how we can speed up the processes, how we can deliver on best practice, and how we can deliver greater for our customers. But as Derek says, it's quite complicated, and there's a lot of factors that come into play with every single connection.
Before I move on, in terms of other people's questions, I just want to pick up on that 50% didn't go ahead. Is there a rural versus urban split in relation to that? Because I'm aware that it's potentially more difficult in rural areas to try and get those connections, and there are specific issues there in rural areas, and the cost that is incurred because of going there. And from a commercial point of view, it may not always be the best option, commercially speaking, for those people, but the rural areas should not be left behind. So in terms of that 50%, where is that Northern Ireland percentage, first of all, and where are we mostly seeing that 50% not
that's
happening?
Northern Ireland, but it's across the board, and there's many reasons. It's not necessarily just because of the grid infrastructure that will drive the commercial decisions that are made by the charge operators. So there's lots of factors that will make them decide not to go ahead. But it is a fact of the matter that the network won't have the same level of capacity when you go into rural areas as opposed to urban. And the cost to upgrade the grid in those certain areas will be more expensive. But I think it's a multitude of factors that will drive charge point operators' decision whether to proceed with the project or not.
So what they would say to us is that vehicle throughput and their forecast demand for charging is probably the first thing. Mm-hmm. Access to site, to a location that they can afford and they can get access to is a really big thing for them. And then they start to look at the other components to connect it. So that tends to there's a cascade, I guess, of issues. Our network is predominantly rural, in fairness, in Northern Ireland. Our society is predominantly rural. There are 930,000 homes and businesses that pay for the electricity network, and they mostly live outside our cities. But what we do find is that there's a density of network in the cities. So your opportunity to connect to somewhere is higher. But at the same time, to dig the streets or to install something in Belfast or Newry is more expensive than it is to do it in Omagh or somewhere else. Yeah. So we don't have a one-size-fits-all. And what we tend to spend a lot of our time doing is working with the specific people in the specific locations to try to come up with the specific bespoke solution for them, which is why the change in connection policy and how we charge for that will make a real difference, not just rurally but everywhere across Northern Ireland.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move to the Deputy Chairperson.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks very much for the evidence and for coming along today. When we had the EV task force in, I said that it's natural that with it being commercially driven that we would see the low-hanging fruit locations going first, and then over time the more difficult and less aspirational places being targeted. Have you seen that, first of all? And what creative solutions going forward are we going to have to look at to overcome the fact that we're going to need places or charging points in places that aren't really desirable? And secondly, I know the Chair touched on the rural versus urban, but what about just the geographical spread as well? Are you, from an NIV point of view, how is that looking currently? Are we on trajectory?
Yeah, I think first of all, in terms of the grid capacity, we publish on our website a capacity map, which kind of gives a red, amber, green status as to the capacity available in certain areas of the network. So naturally, developers and installers will look at that, and as you say, they will go for the low-hanging fruit. First of all, I suppose our intention this year is that map at this point in time gives the current picture of the grid. But as Derek referred to, we have like a £2 billion package to upgrade network capacity across the board. We have fixed projects within that, but we also have flexibility that we can invest as and when and where required in the network. So our intention will be to point to people to say, look, there's maybe limited capacity in that area at present, but there is a plan to upgrade the capacity in that area. The other thing as well is kind of conventional network reinforcement, where we build kind of more substations and more infrastructure, and that kind of thing is kind of innovative and flexible solutions, which is another thing we're kind of investigating. So generally the peak demand on the electricity network tends to be around tea time. So if you have a fleet of vehicles that are out on the road during the day, and a customer has the ability to charge those during the night and avoid the peak time, then that's something that we're exploring actively at this point in time. Similarly with domestic customers, we have a live project ongoing, the Electric Vehicle Northern Ireland Intelligent Charging Project, which is looking at how we can kind of shift peak demand out of that tea time peak towards the evening period.
To be really efficient about it, what we would love to see is that every house in Northern Ireland has an electric vehicle charger in it over time. And if you take every office, every car park, every hotel, every hospital, so people who already have an electricity connection. So you're not building new things. You might have to upgrade or make slightly bigger what's there. But if car parks were being upgraded to have electric vehicle charging in them, if there were minimum standards for a hotel, so that within that facility, so we're not building new lines, or we're not taking up extra space, or we don't have to go through planning permission. So there is an efficient plan-led way of doing this. And when you look at increase in battery capacity and a range of vehicles, and if you take it that general global evidence of 80% of charging done either at home or at work, in effect, like that's a really efficient way of doing it, because the network is already there. Exactly. So one of those barriers is certainly reduced, the cost is reduced, and the timeline is reduced.
I think that's a really valid point, though, and undoubtedly going forward in 20 years' time, it'll be the expectation that everyone's charging at home. But the reality is that 20% of properties in Northern Ireland don't have either off-street or driveways, and 60%, for example, in Belfast don't. So what creative solutions are you seeing coming forward from the commercial sector, and in what way can NIE play a role in that to try and identify that first of all and find a solution to it, because that is going to be the entire ballgame when it comes to getting people in their properties charging?
Lots of bits of technology emerging, particularly in large cities around Europe, where you can see arms coming out of houses and cables coming down and ducts and trays and covers going onto footpaths to give people that opportunity. We're not seeing that here though yet, so we're looking at best practice models and trying to identify what's working well, what's not working so well, and try and get on track with that. We have some trials with, you can see in other jurisdictions where street lights and street furniture can be used to facilitate electric vehicle charging. So we're open to allowing those connections to take. It's not that we're even open. Our license requires us to allow that to happen. And those issues tend to be more about personal and public liability, and then access through whatever local authority to the streetscape. So from our perspective, it will connect ultimately to our network, but sits sort of beyond our licence remit.
And look, it's also important to reflect on the fact that it's only been about a year since the very first high voltage EV connection was made in Northern Ireland in Toome, and that particular connection was a bit of a challenge for all of us. We had a lot of technical requirements that we had to understand, and new safety policies and processes that we had to navigate around. And it's really important for us to maintain the integrity of the network and also public safety. So there's lots of big questions and big issues for us to get through. But through cooperation and collaboration with that particular customer, we were able to make that connection. And I think that, Deputy Chair, is really what we want to focus on, is to really engage closely with industry and with customer groups and with others to sort of drive solutions and come up together with things that will make a real difference in Northern Ireland.
No, I totally agree. And just to finish, Chair, Adele, your point's really well made, as is the point that you referenced before about 50% being turned down. I do think we need that collaborative approach as well with our local councils in terms of planning. There's no point having these creative solutions if we're not finding a way to make them happen. And that needs a bit of flexibility in the planning system, for example, and in how things are going to be dealt with. And hopefully we see that going forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to move to Cahill now.
Thanks, Chair, and I'm glad you mentioned rural versus urban. It's always a
Never miss
debate.
an opportunity.
It's always a healthy debate on a Wednesday morning. A couple of points. I mean, would you say we're at now, and I know it's a new fad first now in relation to where we're going, would you say you're being more proactive or just reacting to what the demand is at present? Or is it a wee bit of both?
I would say we're very proactive and have been for a number of years. I mean, in terms of the connection charging issue, we've been talking to government and others for at least half a decade on that, and really trying to emphasise the importance of it. And that's come from feedback from our stakeholders about what will make a difference from them. We're active members of the task force. I really have to commend the work that's been done in that area. It's been really good, and to have the resource and put into that group and the impetus to push it forward would be excellent. And other organisations like the Electric Vehicle Association in Northern Ireland and the CBI Working Group, all of this collaboration is we're playing into it, our engineers are playing into it, and we also look outside of Northern Ireland. We're in European groups where network operators come together. We're in the Energy Networks Association, again trying to understand best practice and bring that back into Northern Ireland and what we're doing. So I feel we're proactive, but look, like everything, Cahill, we can always do more, but we're open to it.
100%. I just want to tease this a wee bit out, Chair. So we're saying now you've said 300,000 vehicles by 2031. Have you gone as far to think of 2050 on a 25-year delivery model? Because it's important, and I asked that in the context of, because you mentioned here more powers to Utility Regulator and Consumer Council, which is supposed to protect the consumer and value for money. So in the context of all that, your 25-year model, you need to be talking to Council. I like the idea of new housing developments having this connection. I think that's the way forward if we're serious with it. So where are we in terms of more engagement if we're serious about it? Because all of us who's been councillors, we help people get planning permission and we leave it at that. We don't talk about water connections or NIE connections. At some point we've got to get all that married up together. So in the round, if we're serious about delivering all this, where are we in terms of all those conversations? And what powers do you think specifically the Utility Regulator and the Consumer Council could have? Because I'm only thinking what their responsibilities are, to be honest with you. So
I'll let Derek talk about what the Utility Regulator and the Consumer Council power should be, but just in terms of the engagement, we engage with the councils right from Chief Executive level down through to their operational lines, and we also sit on a number of committees. For example, in Belfast City Council, we have some of our senior engineers who sit on those committees to try and help move the debate forward and help influence how things are taken forward. So you might want to talk about the Consumer Council.
Yeah, so if you look at the legislative mandate for Ofgem, say in London, or CRU in Dublin, both of those regulatory authorities are mandated to regulate for climate change and to make sure that the plans put in place by the likes of NIE or UK Power Networks or whoever it might be are aligned with national climate change targets. So for example, if a council comes to us and says they have a plan over the next 5 years to install 200 public charging points, rather than the current approach, which is when those charging points want to be installed, they send in an application, we do the network design, we do all that stuff, then we go to the utility regulator and get the revenues. A change in the utility regulator mandate would allow a company like NIE to go ahead and pre-build or to anticipate some of that necessary electricity investment so that it's there ready for that. That has been, we've been working with the Department for the Economy for a number of years in terms of the drafting of that legislation to equalise the powers that the utility regulator in Northern Ireland have with Ofgem in London and with CRU in Dublin. So that's one way where you would potentially get out ahead of the demand and potentially reduce the timeline. The money's more or less the same. You're either spending it in retrospect or spending it ahead. Now that's a fundamental change in the vires of the utility regulator. In absentia of that, what we do is, and I'll come back to your point about the forecast, if those vehicles don't come along and therefore we don't need to do all of the work that's required on the network, we're not allowed to claim those revenues. So we have to retrospectively report to the utility regulator how many items of work that we did before that happens. So it's not that the money gets spent if the vehicles aren't there. Now, one way or the other, as we mentioned earlier, by 2050, car manufacturers won't be making petrol and diesel, it'll all be electric anyway. So it's not so much about if it needs to be done, it's more about whether you do it quickly, slowly, whether you wait for it to happen or whether you try to anticipate it and get out in advance of it.
Well, just a final point, the 25-year delivery model, because if you're not telling the council now on projections for their plans for to build 10,000 units over the next 10 years, that has to be part and parcel of it. I know just finally, Chair, you've mentioned delays in plan here. There's delays in plan right across the board. Just you'd like to comment on that and just a wee bit more about your 25-year delivery plan, how you see that going, yeah.
Delays in planning, so for an awful lot of the work that we need to do, both for electric vehicle charging or for North-South Interconnector or for anything, requires planning. So we have some of the same concerns that everybody else in Northern Ireland has who are trying to build infrastructure or housing or whatever. We believe that a sensible step in terms of planning is to make sure that we fully resource the planning system and all the statutory consultees. We're not sitting here asking for something to be torn up and a new model to be implemented. We believe we work effectively enough with the local councils and with the planning authorities, and we invest a lot of time and effort so that planning and planning issues as much as possible aren't on the critical path for our projects. There are other things, there's procurement, there's consent, there's way leaves, there are lots of other things, but it's part of the package. The 25-year delivery model is an interesting one. Like, we procure framework contracts on potentially up to a sort of a 7 or 8 year basis. And when I go out to procure either materials for network upgrade or contract capabilities to do the work, the first thing they ask for is certainty. How much and when. So the greater certainty that we can give them for the longest period of time with the highest volume of work reduces the price per unit of work and gets the best value for the people of Northern Ireland. Every 6 years or 7 years we go back to the utility regulator and we have to account for our upcoming plan. They benchmark that plan, that delivery model, the mixture of NIE staff versus contract staff, how we do all of our procurement against what they see across all of the other electricity companies in the UK and Ireland. So we've just literally gone through that process, concluded in December of last year, and on the next 6 year basis, but that's the 6 years between 2025 and 2031 is part of a package of 3 price controls that we had to present our plans to the utility regulator. So that's all the way out to RP9, which is 2045. And in reality, we will need to have the work done by 2045 to support net zero 2050. Yeah. Like, if we're still building in 2050 to support 2050, it's too late. So from our perspective, it's not quite a 25-year model, it's more of an 18, 19-year model, but that's the gist of it.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, like, our forecasts go to 2050, as I mentioned earlier. We'll continue to refine those, and a critical part of that is our stakeholder engagement with our councils, with our major energy users, and that kind of thing. The other point just to note, I suppose, like any assets that we replace today, so there's transformers and there's switchgear that we're replacing today because its age expired. We'll do a study on that, and we'll make sure that when we replace that today, that is fit to accommodate 2050.
Okay, thank you. Peter?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you guys for coming in. You mentioned there, Derek, about you're not responsible for the charging points going in. I totally take that point, but it's been brought to me a couple of times, and apologies if this has been answered. The issue becomes then getting access to the grid. It might take sometimes up to 18 months. What are the main challenges there for you guys to deliver that, but also what solutions are being explored to maybe try to speed that up?
Yeah, so the 18 months, and we don't doubt the fact that certain of the charge points have taken that length of time, but they tend to be the outliers, and they tend to be the ones that it's really difficult to get agreement with landowners to build network through the site. They tend to be the ones where we need to upgrade the network feeding the location, which may require planning permission, may require, as Andrew says, us to procure new transformers. It may require us to bring civil contractors, electrical contractors out to do the work, so there's a whole coordination there. But in lots of cases, the 18 months, a lot of it is taken up with negotiations on price. So we can give a high-level indication that we think it's going to be £100,000. We go and we carry out all of the detailed design work, and it turns into £150,000. And then, because of the connection charging policy, we end up in an ongoing engagement with the connecting party. Before the contract is signed, the site can be secured, the legalities put in place. So there's no doubt sometimes it's 18 months, but it tends to be a basket of all of those issues.
Yeah, the only thing I would say, I think it's important to put a bit of context in, especially for the large, these large commercial jobs. Quite often the capacity they'll use is about 1,000 kVA, and for context, that's the size of a factory. So although it looks small, it's really power hungry, and so there's quite a bit of work, design work, that has to take place beforehand. A lot of, as I said earlier, that cooperation with the customer to try and arrive at a design that's going to work for them and for that area. And I suppose we mentioned earlier legalities, typically 9 months is what that will take, and that's something that we're trying again to work with respective legal teams to try and speed that up a little. But it's trying to find the landowner who actually owns this lease, and then securing that. So it can be complicated. Now that said, as Derek mentioned, we have one of our senior engineers will triage every single job as it comes in.
Sorry, I don't know what's happened there.
Really to give an indication to the customer what's the likely price and what's the likely time scale, so at least they can make a commercial decision at that point. Do they wish to proceed or not? And then we go ahead. We have I talked about the fact that we've got a lot more experience with these now, which is helping to speed things up. Our organisation has grown. The major projects team, for example, that looks after this area of the business, have tripled in size over the past few years. Our company in general, we've gone from 1,250 to 1,600 people. And that's all to support this energy transition, of which EV connection is all part of it. But we know we've a long way to go, and looking at what's happening in other jurisdictions and how we can speed that up is an ongoing part of our jobs, and happy to take it forward with the charge point operators.
But you asked about what makes it quicker. The new connection charging policy that gives people greater certainty over the cost, and having more upfront visibility of what that cost will be. Like, we believe it will take an awful lot of that pre-connection interaction out of it. So the idea that I'll speculatively look for 5 sites, I'll just pick the one that I want, I'll know how much it's going to cost me, and then I have certainty around that. And a lot of the charge point operators would talk about the process they go through, say, in Dublin versus the one in Belfast. In Dublin, they know up front what the price is going to be. It's set, it's a standard sort of charge depending on what type of thing they want and where they want it. Up here, it's much more of a voyage of discovery, because every single item needs to be designed and priced before we can sign the contract with them. So we believe that makes it much quicker, and the transparency allows decisions to happen much faster.
Deputy Chair mentioned about the difficulties for people that don't have a driveway. A lot of them being based in Belfast and declaring an interest. I don't have a driveway. I park on the street for street parking. So I think looking at it, rapid charge points are really important within this conversation, rather than people just parking their car and charging their car for a couple of hours or whatever. The rapid charge points is an important element of this. Do you have any indication how many we actually have in Northern Ireland? And is there a difference between access to the grid if it's going to be a rapid charging point or just a normal one?
I think in terms of the numbers, public accessible charge points in Northern Ireland currently we have around 700, and probably around 200 of those present are classified as rapid chargers. But as Derek kind of alluded to earlier, it's probably a balance there. If you're charging at your workplace or somewhere, kind of destination charging, a hotel or your workplace or a supermarket, then it doesn't have to be that kind of very fast charging. And there is probably specific use cases like of kind of motorway services where those kind of rapid charge points really have their place.
And then just lastly, Chair, Derek, you mentioned, I wasn't going to raise this, but you mentioned utility licences during one of your answers there. And it reminded me of a conversation I had with someone, I think last year, about the legislation. I don't know if this is true or not. The legislation makes it easier for if you've got a phone box, for example, you don't need to apply for planning permission, but EVs aren't mentioned within the legislation. Is that a challenge? I'm not sure about this, but does any legislation need to be updated to assist with the introduction of more charging points for EVs?
Not sure, but I'll ask anyway.
Please do.
I'm not sure, but I take the point that if there were if EV charge points were considered to be exempt from planning, it would make things much quicker. So there are legislation in place in jurisdictions which allow street furniture, for example, to proceed. I just don't know if that's the case, but you could totally see how an exempt status for electric vehicle charging infrastructure or for other infrastructure around net zero, and you'll have wind farm operators and everybody saying, well, all these things. So I think that needs to be looked, back to the earlier point, in the basket of overall climate change legislation that's needed to support the overarching legislation for Northern Ireland.
Thank you.
Stephen, I'll come to you, but if you don't mind, I don't want to curtail the conversation, but if we can just keep questions, answers just as distinct as we possibly can. Stephen, I know you will be.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, folks. You've given a lot of information already so far. Just a couple of ones. You mentioned costs there, Derek, and we'll bring it right down to consumer domestic level. What is your assessment of the impact on the monthly domestic electric bill of having a charger at home, given that cost is ultimately a major factor on consumer choice and preferences, certainly today?
So we don't have responsibility for the bill as such. That's the supplier.
Yeah. But you can appreciate. I know you don't, but you appreciate.
But yeah, what you tend to see is that people's consumption of electricity goes up significantly, but because it is cheaper per kilometre to use electricity than it is to use petrol or diesel at the minute, particularly if you're charging at home at night, your overall household expenditure with an electric vehicle is cheaper. You'll pay more for your electricity, but significantly less in total because you're not paying petrol and diesel. That tends to be the case globally because of the way electricity is priced relative to petrol and diesel.
No, I appreciate that. And the other point just touched upon a number of times about the urban-rural thing, and I appreciate it is good that you're looking at innovative solutions around the world, learning lessons from it. And just to reiterate that point about I think in my experience, the rural areas there often is a lot more room around a house. Whereas certainly in my constituency close to here, with so many terraced housing, for example, and you can see there is huge challenges where you've maybe a street with 50, 60 houses on it. So it was interesting that point that you're saying. So I don't think we need to rehearse that one. Just the final point was around the rapid charging. We have an ultra rapid charging hub, a private operation, the Maxwell, quite close to here within my own constituency. There's a recent media article just a few months ago where they were reassessing how much they keep going with these, given the low sales and so on. So I suppose just to tap in what sort of level of engagement you have with the private operators like that, because obviously they're key to meeting the targets and increasing usage and so on.
We've worked directly with Maxwell even before they entered into the Northern Ireland market in this area. So we worked really hand in glove with them on that flagship project, and very much find the delivery of that as important for us as it is to them. But in terms of whether it's a commercial success for them or not, we really can't comment.
Yeah,
I mean,
well, they
it's
described
really
it as a chicken and egg conundrum, you know, in terms of the overall picture. You know, if sales are down and low, you know. So I suppose you're obviously keen to see that up, you know, and make the targets and so on.
It's fundamental for us. If people aren't using electricity, our network isn't being used, and therefore the cost of provision of that network goes up. So it's absolutely in our interest to get people to use as much electricity that is renewably produced as possible. So investing in the network and then people not using it is a disaster for the commercial operators, and it's ultimately a disaster for us.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Most of the other points have been covered, so thank you, folks. Thanks.
Thank you, Stephen. Keith?
Okay, the chair has spoken earlier, so I better behave. Just a couple of specific questions. You talked about 7 kilowatt charging. Is that input or output for the homeowner?
Output.
Output?
And to be 6.9 to your car. Yeah, there's a little bit of it.
It's not okay, so it's output from the charger to the car. You sure about that? You sure it's not a 7 kilowatt input? Because a standard plug-in is only 2.3 kilowatt. I think it's 7 kilowatt. So it's effectively the same as a homeowner sharing. 7 kilowatt.
Yeah, so within the house you could have a power shower which is, you know, potentially up to 12 kilowatts.
Yeah, or 8.
Yeah, your charger, the standard charger is 6.97 kilowatts.
Okay. So that's actual usage of power to the charger.
To the vehicle. The losses through it are really small.
So, moving on to your page 4 regarding the building standards, right? So today if a person puts in a 7 kilowatt charger, and you talk about fit and inform, okay, so in my head that's the same as that person sharing theoretically for 4 or 5 hours at night, okay? Why would they, if they're building a new house, why would they put that down as a building standard? Because if I turn around now and put a new supply, so 8 kilowatt for say lighting, 2 kilowatt, cooking, outdoor heat pump, and I put another 7 kilowatt for charging, you're going to charge me more for my connection. So why would I do that? Why would I not come in after and say, oh, by the way, I forgot, I've now bought the wife has come home with an electric car, I'm going to fit and inform. Oh, no, you know the argument coming on.
No, why does the wife have to come home in the car?
There's somebody else come home, Chair, just record that properly.
You know my point. So what's the benefit?
This is another one for a morning in New Mills for us.
Absolutely.
The big issue, the biggest cost to a homeowner of installing retrospectively a car charger is chasing walls, drilling holes in the outside wall. It's the physical infrastructure of the house. Like your electrical infrastructure is probably okay because exactly, you're right, it has to cater for potentially 12 kilowatts instantaneous with the shower. Mm-hmm. There'll be a little switch installed that stops the shower in the electric vehicle. If I have the car plugged in, my wife can't take a shower. So that is a fact. But the fact is, in our house, we had to take a circuit from the fuse board in the utility room, chase a wall, drill an outside wall, put in conduit outside the house. We spent more on the physical installation than anything else. So if you have a new house that's built that has the electric vehicle charger literally plonked onto the side of the house, connected electrically, and all that work is done for the homeowner. Now the argument is that it increases incrementally the cost of the house build, but it's less than the incremental cost of doing the work at a later point, and the decoration and the new floor and everything.
What's the benefit for that new homeowner to write an additional 8 kilowatt or 7 kilowatt onto the connection card for you guys?
So our electrical standards for all new houses, traditionally it was about 2.5 kilowatts was what we expected to be used on average at the house.
Yeah.
Everything we build from last year onwards for new homes is 5.5 kilowatts. So we've brought it up for electric vehicles and for heat pumps.
So you're not really putting it up? So are you assuming eventually that house is going to have an electric charger?
Yes.
Broadly? Okay. Next question, if I may,
Very
Chair.
quickly,
So someone today gets an electric car, puts on a charger. What tariff are they using tonight? I know you don't do the tariffs, but what tariff are they using tonight? And how are you going to incentivise that in the future so you don't have them coming home at 5 and plugging in the car that they plug in at 10 before they go to bed? How are you going to do that?
Generally, at the minute, people are using an Economy 7 tariff.
So they are using that?
Well, it's sensible. Like your Economy 7 is probably half the price of your normal tariff. So if you're able to plug your car in between whatever 10 and 8, 12 and 7, whatever the time is, you'll charge it for half the price that you would during the day. The long-term answer to all of that, to give people flexibility, is smart metering, which allows more real-time price signals to be displayed to the homeowner and to give them the choice. And if they want to do it during the day and it's more expensive, they can take that decision. And then the suppliers will be mandated, we expect, through the smart metering process to offer bespoke EV tariffs, whereas at the minute it's just the Economy 7 type tariff.
Final question. You see the fitting and forms, and many of those today would be going on to, I call it Economy 7, the nighttime tariff. Many of them, would you know, out of the fitting and forms, is it hard, or do you know that?
We've no idea, but we would expect as many as are humanly possible.
Purely because it's going to be more cost effective.
It's a sensible thing. Now, it just depends, because if people have loads of electricity use during the day, they might not do that, but for most people they would.
Another question on socialisation, but I may not be fit to ask it.
Okay. Just for we have two other members on my list, and we are pushed for time now. But it's just to say, Avani did highlight to us in terms of the cost for consumers. They have said in their evidence to us that the cost of domestic charging is 14 pence. Using Economy 7 as opposed to the charging network rates of 49 pence. So just to give that differentiation. Mark, I'm counting on you to come in with your question straight away.
She's on the clock, Mark. Really sure what the question is, but we'll get there. Chair, thank you, and thank you for the presentation. I'm interested especially, I suppose, in what you had says around the importance of the planned approach to EV infrastructure rollout and ensuring fairness for all network users, and others have touched on the rural-urban divide, but it's not just a rural-urban divide. In my constituency here up in Derry, there's a feeling or a perception that there's an urban divide where I think in terms of the infrastructure, publicly accessible infrastructure that we have for EVs is nowhere near that other cities, and one larger city in particular has, even proportionally. And I was wondering, is the lack of infrastructure in Derry, that's nothing to do with the lack of capacity at NIE's end? Sure, it's not.
No. So we just haven't seen the level of interest from public charge point operators to build the charging infrastructure up there. And I think it was a bit like, was it Stephen that said it's a chicken and egg here? They would argue that until there is enough volume of cars up there and there is an inherent local demand, there is no commercial incentive for them to try and build it. It's only at that point do we get to challenge and see whether the capacity is there and how much is it going to cost, and the timeline. So we try to forecast it, but we won't know until they see enough vehicles to make them want to go and install them. I was up in McGee campus a couple of weeks ago queuing for the one charger on site. So we've all had personal experience of it.
But I think it's important to note that other jurisdictions, for example, Scotland, rather than taking a market-driven approach, they're taking a government-led approach. And that's really helping shape the direction of where these charge points are going. And I think there's 30,000 more that are going to go in quite soon. So I think it's just to add to that point, Mark, it's maybe something to consider.
Oh, no, it's something I have considered, and I just wanted to get clarity that there was no obstacle at your end, if you like. Another one, given the I suppose being in a border constituency, this is something that I've noticed over the past couple of years. We've seen maybe 4 or 5 new petrol stations open up, which is remarkable because for a long time, and it's given where we are in the border, we had very few petrol stations because I suppose it was cheaper over the border. Fuel. So now we've seen an upsurge in applications and approvals for stations here. But that got me thinking in terms of a price differential between electricity on both sides of the border. And what sort of work are you doing with your counterparts then in the south on that, do you perceive anything then, like, commercial opportunities maybe for someone in the north, where at the moment I think electricity is significantly cheaper than it is in the south, or at least it was last year. I'm not sure if it still is the case, but where we might be dealing with more than the demand for northern registered vehicles, if you know what I mean.
So I take the point in petrol and diesel, much cheaper in Northern Ireland than the Republic of Ireland at the minute. If you look at what Norway did, they just taxed the living daylights out of petrol and diesel, which meant that they were constantly increasing the price of fossil fuels, and they were using renewable electricity to push down the price of electricity. So that overall cost thing was working. The differential between nighttime charging in the Republic of Ireland and the Economy 7 tariffs up here is actually very, very small. With smart metering in the Republic of Ireland, they have time of use, so they have different segments of cost depending on what point of the day it is. We don't have any, in fact, we would hear more complaints about people saying that they have to drive to Castle Bellingham to charge because there aren't enough opportunities to charge in Northern Ireland. But the big issue on price is the fact that it could cost you 50,000 to connect your charge point, your 1 MVA, like Adele talked about. In the Republic of Ireland, it could cost you 300,000 to charge it, or 200,000 in Northern Ireland. So that's the big price issue. And what you find then is that the people who are pricing it at the vehicle charger have to build that cost back into what they're charging. So you could be paying 76p per kilowatt hour in Northern Ireland for electricity for your vehicle at a rapid charger. You could be paying 70 cent in the Republic of Ireland, which is probably, 60p. So there could be, it's the opposite. I'd say public charging in the Republic of Ireland is cheaper. Petrol and diesel in Northern Ireland is cheaper.
Okay, Mark?
Yeah, it was just about how we're looking at those fluctuations going forward. And then finally, I was interested just in the point around Norway or other jurisdictions where they've taxed the life out of petrol and diesel to push people towards renewables. Obviously, governments around the world then at some point, as more people move to renewables or electric vehicles, governments are going to start missing the tax revenue generated through petrol and diesel. So it's fair enough to assume, would it be that they're then going to start taxing the life out of EVs?
Your remit.
It's all quiet. It's all gone quiet over here.
Mark, just like they're looking at us as the politicians there, just for.
Any word over your Mark?
The reserved matter. Okay.
Okay, happy enough. Move on. Yeah. Okay. Danny.
Yeah, and my point. Thank you. Very, very small point. It was just something back on what Peter was saying. It just came to my head. How do you factor in the planning for the changing in technology? We're talking about the here and now, and almost half guessing what will be here in the next 5 years, but the next 10 to 15, 20 years, technology is moving so quick now that on-street parking may not even be an issue because the battery life could be so much better in these cars. So how do you factor that in your planning?
I think a key part of our kind of regulatory price control, or our P7 process, is an innovation fund, and we have a number of defined innovation projects where we're looking at a range of issues related to the electricity network. So one of the things that we see on the horizon with electric vehicles is kind of vehicle to grid functionality, where you can charge your battery off peak, but then you can use your battery then to bring power back to your home and that kind of thing, and that changes the dynamics. It changes the power flows on the grid, but we have a dedicated innovation team that is kind of looking out beyond that kind of 5-6 year price control, kind of looking out 10-15 years to see what is coming down the line, how is technology, vehicle technology evolving, and we will build that in, and we'll refine our models on the back of that information.
Yeah. Solar panel on your roof and a battery in your garden will reduce significantly what every home is using on the electricity network. So our challenge, back to the earlier point, is to try and not build new stuff, but maximise what's already there, so that you're not effectively stranding any investment.
No, I was just that to be small point. Thank
Super.
you. Thank you.
Thank you. Luke, we're over time, but Luke, thank you very much for coming to the committee today. We really do appreciate it. There may be some follow-up just that we may come back to just to get some information, and no doubt we'll have you back at the committee again soon. But thank you for your time today. We really do appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Okay, Keith, you were wanting to raise something about socialisation. Now, it might not totally be linked to this committee. Was it a point in relation to what we were discussing?
Socialisation from electrical or new connections, whether it be domestic factories, I presume it'll be the same for, say you're building a multi-charger unit. I presume this is all going to be socialised, I assume.
Yeah.
Not sure.
It's economy. I appreciate there's a consultation possibly coming out on that shortly. But I assume socialisation is going to be, is there going to be different tariffs for not-for-profit? So domestic property, socialisation figure, or say somebody building a charging station with 10 units, am I paying for that?
I get your point, Keith, but it's not really something for this committee to follow.
I thought I was going to get someone out of Derry, but
potentially, yeah.
We tripped to Norway.
Second. I was listening. I mean, I think we're all different characters here, and I tend to listen more than a question sometimes. There was some really interesting things, not least the last point you made there about solar panels and batteries. And I'm just wondering, was there ever a raise paper on this sort of how we interconnect charging and vehicles? And if there was a raised paper, if there hasn't been a raised paper on this issue, is it worth getting a raised paper on this issue? Just to sort of.
I'm not sure from my experience being on the committee.
I think we did get a raised paper, and Johnny might be able to keep me right here as well. There was a raised paper on EV charging.
And sort of cross street and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and it talked about the challenges in terms of cross pavement charging.
But maybe not so much linked to your point where you're talking about the energy side of things.
That's the sort of what we were sort of. Is it worth? Can we get something, or is it worth taking that out, or what, or just to recirculate, or what?
I'm not opposed to it, but the only thing is we need to be cognizant of the fact that there is another committee that deals, I suppose, potentially with some of the energy issues, and we need to be quite specific in terms of what we would be actually looking at in terms of the energy and the EV charging aspect of things, but we can try and check up to see if there's anything already in relation to that, if you're happy, and then we can come back. Would that be okay?
No, appreciate that, thank you.
Sorry.
2 points, Chair, which is of interest to us. I mean, this whole thing about giving planning permission, if we're serious about breaching climate change targets, it strikes me all the time, any of us who deals with planning, we give planning permission to an individual and then they go seek all the other services. At some point we're going to have to try and make sure that's engaged, and it's good that they're having conversations with council, because you can't build a house without having an NAE connection or electric connection. And there seems to be more conversations going on. So arising what we heard today, I think it's finance is in charge. Is it them that strikes the laws for?
Well, that's what they said in that session.
Has the economy a part to play in some of the regulations as well? No, it's only finance.
You're talking about building control and stuff?
It's mostly finance, isn't it? It's mostly finance. But see if they're not having the conversations. We can interview or have presentations here with individual organisations, like NAW is another one. And at some point we have a responsibility, when the Minister's up the next time, our planning service itself, to try and ensure there's more engagement going forward with these new bills, because if they don't regulate for these things, it's not going to happen.
So I'm conscious we do need to come to the budget sessions, and we do have a few things that we need to do after that. So I'm reminding members just to keep everything brief and keep things moving. That's me included. But planning is one of our. We are going to be looking at planning, and the planning is it's across every bit of infrastructure. So I mean, you're right in the sense of when the minister's up, need to ask, and it would be useful. That's why I said about the paper, being useful to see what they're actually requesting needs to be done in relation to the building regulations, the safety aspects, all of that. It'd be useful to see that paper to then get an idea of where industry, I suppose, wants us to move in relation to it as well, Cahill. So, Keith, you wanted to come in?
Just on that point, if you're thinking about having NIA as a consultee, and maybe you're not thinking that, you would get nothing built then, and they would have too much power.
No, I'm not even saying. All I'm saying, more engagement. We can't. These people are saying. We keep saying departments work in silos. Every other organisation outside of ours, Keith, you know that yourself. I'm not saying that. We need to just have better engagement. That's all I'm saying. But it's like he said about getting planning permission to put one of these in retrofitting in houses. You know, the planning permission is delayed, or you need. There's things we can look at ourselves. But listen.
Okay, so very key oral evidence session coming up, folks. So I'm sure you all want to ask questions in relation to it. You don't have to, but it is important. So if we could try and keep, obviously, we want to get the most out of this. So we'll now move on to item 8, which is the January monitoring round, Department for Infrastructure oral evidence. At page 207, you'll see the Clerk's Memo DFI January monitoring round. At page 212, you'll see the January monitoring round, Department for Infrastructure. At page 214, you'll see Committee for Finance, Department of Finance, Communication to Departments, Spring Supplementary Estimates. At page 239, you'll see the Minister of Finance oral statement, Public Expenditure 2024-25, October monitoring, 11th of November 2024. At page 255, you'll see official reports, June monitoring round 26th of June 2024, and at page 262 you'll see the official report, October monitoring round 16th of October 2024. Firstly, apologies for keeping you waiting, and thank you for coming to the committee today. So we're welcoming back to the committee Susan Anderson, Director of Finance, Declan McGowan, Deputy Secretary for Water and Departmental Delivery, Colin Woods, Deputy Secretary for Transport and Road Asset Management, and Judith Andrews, Acting Deputy Secretary for Climate Planning and Public Transport. Look, you're very welcome. If it's Happy New Year, as it would go. And look, thank you for the evidence that you have provided to the committee, which we have taken a look at as per usual. I know you have the slides there, but if you wouldn't mind just keeping it as brief as you possibly can. And the other thing to say is, Colin, I'm sorry I'm singling you out, but the committee probably would like to maybe ask you some questions in relation to the traffic issues in Belfast, if you would be willing. We'll keep that short and succinct, but that will probably be at the end of the next session, because I know that you're staying for the business plan as well. If you wouldn't mind, that would be great. Anything else? I know you mightn't be able to answer all the questions today because we have brought you up in terms of budget and the business plan, but if we can follow up on that would be great. Sorry about that. So without further ado, if you wouldn't mind outlining brief 5 minutes if you can. We're really keen to come to members' questions as per usual, so thank you.
Okay, yes, so Chair, I'll just lay down a very, very short presentation. I'll keep it within the 5 minutes. So I'll just start then in terms of resource and the resource position. So just to bring the committee members up to date in terms of the outcome of October monitoring, you recall then we submitted bids of 52.1 million. The majority of that was for NI Water, 23 million, an amount then for winter service, and further amount then for essential service, for essential maintenance and Translink as well. We received an allocation of 22.8 million, and we also had identified some small internal allocations that we could use to meet some of our pressures. So following the outcome, then Minister agreed to allocate 4.1 million. So that covered the 3 million of winter service and a further 1 million, which was a targeted intervention for gully emptying in preparation for winter readiness as well. So that goes towards our winter service. I also allocated 4.2 for essential road maintenance and then 11.5 to NI Water. So that's over half of the allocation that we received as part of the monitoring round outcome went to NI Water, with a balance then of 6.85 going towards Translink. Moving on then to the recently submitted January monitoring return, we submitted then on terms of resource a bid of 2 million for Translink concessionary fares, the balance then of the NI Water amount that wasn't funded, 11 million, and then the Translink pressure that was previously reported as part of October had reduced down to 4.4 million, so a total then of 17.9 1.4 million reported then as part of January monitoring. Moving on then to look at capital. So again, the committee will recall we submitted bids of 110.7 million, and that included then our over planning amount of 13.7 million as well. So again, just slight recap, 30 million if that was for NI Water, 25 structural maintenance, balance then for Translink with 9.7 for street lighting as well. So again, we received just under 40 million, 39.6 million we received as part of the outcome. Again, over half of that went to NI Water, 19.5, and that was targeted towards releasing wastewater constraints, with around 2,300 properties being unlocked as a result of that targeted funding. 14.5 then went to structural maintenance and street lighting within Tram Group, and Translink then received a general allocation of 5 million. So that's where we were in relation to the outcome of October. Moving on to January monitoring, again we submitted quite strong bids here. We had a number of inescapable amounts for the A5, for example, for advanced works, as well as amounts for the remaining over planning commitment of 12 million we'd work that down to, with 5 for the transport hub and 3 then for Translink zero emission buses. In terms of the remaining strong bids we submitted in relation to scalable bids, so these are amounts we could spend anything up to these amounts in relation to structural maintenance, NI Water, and then Translink's amounts as set out then within the presentation. So that's where we are in terms of the in-year position. I just thought it would be helpful as well, since we're here, just to give just a bit of an overview in relation to the draft budget 25-26, which has been released then for consultation as well. So in terms of the outcome then and resource for the department, the budget allocation, the draft budget allocation is 633.3 million. So that represents a 13% increase from our opening budget for this current financial year, or a 7.7% increase if we look at the October monitoring, i.e. the position that we're currently working to. It's the largest resource budget proposed for DFI since its inception as well. However, it is about 8%, 83 million less than what we would have needed to deliver everything that we'd identified. So last time the committee, we'd given you an indication of everything that we had put forward. So it still will require a degree of prioritisation, and at this stage, just to be clear, Minister will not have taken any decisions in relation to that draft budget. It is a draft budget. So that was resource. Moving on then to capital. Again, the draft capital budget outcome is 932.7, 390 of that's ring fenced, so it's ring fenced for the things the committee will be familiar with, the A5, city deals and the transport hub. There's another further ring fenced amount in there for NI Water in relation to RRI borrowings. That's just over 100 million there within that as well. So that represents a 14% increase from where we were at the opening position for this year, and again, largest capital budget ever proposed for any NICS department. And similar to resource, no decisions have yet been taken. So where do we go from here in terms of 25-26? We are currently progressing through our equality screenings, and they're in the process of being finalised as we speak. The outcome of those will determine then whether or not we need to consult or not. And again, if we do go to consultation, that will be taken to committee in line with procedures. Following which then decisions will be allocated on allocations will be made once we have a final budget agreed. Then a minister will be invited to take decisions then. So that was a very quick run through.
No,
as quick as I could go. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I really do appreciate that, and obviously as a committee we're really keen to understand, because we want to ensure that we're able to get what we need to do everything, which is key given the pressures that are within the department. So just kicking off in terms of the resource bids, so for the January monitoring round, the department obviously you submitted resource bids of 17.4 million, of which 2 million was categorised as inescapable for the concessionary fares. So what was the baseline resource allocation for concessionary fares for the financial year?
I think it's roughly about 45 million. Apologies, I don't have the actual figures here.
Yeah, we'll have to come back. It's sort of, I only have it wrapped up within the overall Translink allocation, but we'll come back to you with the actual figure, yeah.
Okay, so given then the categorisation of the inescapable bid for concessionary fares, what are the underlying factors for this additional resource?
Sure, if I can maybe take that one?
Yeah.
The pressures have come, actually, I know you want to talk about the traffic congestion, but we do have a shift in that people obviously who have concessionary fares, there's been a bigger uptake of that, the concessionary fares, so linked to the traffic congestion. The other thing as well is it's part of, I suppose, the win coming out of the hub as well, in that there's just people are choosing to use their concessionary fare, be it the 60 plus, the 65 plus, or those who are qualified for the 50% off. So there's just a higher uptake. So part of it we think is linked to the hub, and that people want trying it out, going to visit it, and so there's an uptake that way. But also I think with the messaging around the traffic congestion as well, those people who maybe would have used their cars have elected instead to take public transport in to the city in particular.
Okay, that's interesting actually, because it's one of the things that the committee were actually talking about was the fact of, we're trying to figure out how that messaging has actually worked or not in relation to that. So it's interesting. So just as in, are you confident that the department will not be at risk of overspend that in that regard because of, as you have put it there, there is that increase of people opting to use their bus pass?
Well, not overspend. I mean, there's good management information in terms of the usage, so that's what's been used to kind of project the year end. What we may need to do is actually look at 25-26 in terms of what impact it has on 25-26.
Okay. So then there's two further high priority bids. So the NI Water and the TransLink one there as well. So how will these bids, how will the bids for the NI Water and TransLink being used? Are you aware of how they've been used?
Well, what we've done is we've been working closely with Northern Water and TransLink to see what is it they need for this financial year. In the case of Northern Water, they were closer to about the 160 million mark for resource for this year. They're currently sitting at 149-ish, and so that 11 bid is to try and close that gap. In the event that we don't get additional funding for them, and the same will be true for TransLink, then it's a case of cutting the cloth and living within the amount that they have and making any savings that they can and live within that 149 in the case of Northern Water.
Sure, if I may come in on the TransLink piece, it's all about strengthening the financial viability of TransLink. Since we were last up at the committee for October monitoring, with the October monitoring award and just ongoing efficiencies within TransLink, their financial position has improved, and indicatively it's looking much better. But the 4.4 million is to bring them up to the requirement of a 30 million cash position at year end, and that's all about their going concern status. So the money, if received, will just strengthen their financial viability in terms of going forward, and underline their going concern issue.
Okay, so what support and evidence then was contained within the department's submission to the finance department to underpin the bid?
So in terms of the submission, there is a template, so every department is required to complete the same templates that they submit to DOF in relation to any bids that they are putting forward. So again, it would have been the evidence that has been set out today, be summarised in a bid and prioritised accordingly, inescapable or high priority, depending on which bids were being put forward.
Could you undertake to include that supporting information to the committee, because it will help provide us with a fuller picture of each bid, for the future monitoring rounds, because obviously we will have our priorities too, and this department affects the real life of the constituents, and I travel the roads every day to work too, so but just help us understand exactly what is contained underneath each of those bids that are submitted, if that's okay. Okay, I just wanted to ask in relation to the capital bids then, in terms of the department's bids there, and just in relation to what assurances can you give from a departmental point of view, that you'll be able to manage the capital allocation to avoid any overspend if the bids are not met in full, or if the executive approval for reclassification isn't given?
Yeah, so in terms of the capital over planning commitments, so we're sitting at the moment with 12 million, so we have been very clear that whenever we'd be making our allocations internally, and indeed to our ALBs as well, that if we don't get that met, then schemes will be required to be paused or slowed down and moved into next year, so that we do live within the budget allocation that we have.
So in terms of those schemes that you're looking at to pause, and I hate that term because I have PTSD nearly over some of the schemes that were paused around the city deals and all of that element of things. So do you have an idea or a list at this moment in time in terms of schemes that could be potentially paused if, you know, these are not met?
So within the department, yes, for example, the tram group, there will be areas that individuals will be looking at to say, okay, well, we'll pause those because they haven't actually issued out yet. So we would have those within the department, yeah.
Yeah, so, for example, there would be a number of resurfacing schemes that we're planning to deliver between now and the end of the financial year that are reliant on some additional money. The works orders haven't issued yet, so you either just don't issue them, or in extreme circumstances you can slow the project down, as Susan says, and that pushes the spend into the following financial year when we'll have a fresh budget.
Are you looking at key infrastructure projects that could be hurt as a result of that, or can you say at this stage?
It very much depends on what amount of money you're working with. In extremis, you stop what you need to stop to not overspend the budget, obviously, but we're not expecting to be in a position where we're having to make large decisions of that nature. We just need to wait and see the outcome of January monitoring.
Okay. I'm going to move to Deputy Chair at this stage.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks so much again for coming along, for answers, etc. so far. When we heard from the aggregate and mineral sector and the contractors carrying out the essential road maintenance and repairs, they were very concerned about the cliff edge they were facing, and you identified that last time you came. Just keen to get an idea of where we're at in terms of the budget for maintenance for this year and also for next year, and is there a bit in the next year's budget to try and change the threshold so that repairs can be done quicker when we're not hitting those depths that we're currently hitting, Colin?
Yeah, so from a structural maintenance perspective, we have a standing bid. We can make a bid any day of the week for more money for structural maintenance, and we're always ready to do that. So we have a programme of schemes across the network, and we take the ones off the list that we can afford to do, and we're always ready with more. And that's part of how we work with the industry to try and give them a bit of foresight into what we're planning. When we get the money from a monitoring round, for example, we very quickly disperse it to the roads divisions, and then they get on with commissioning the works that they need to do, and that's a process that we're very, very used to and can turn around very quickly as and when additional money becomes available.
Okay, so the money that's been allocated for the current financial year, is that just essential maintenance only, or are there any schemes, for example, that may have been identified that could be carried out before the end of the financial year that weren't planned to be done before that monitoring round?
We would always have a longer list than the money available, so we're never having to go around and generate a scheme, if you like. And we're just in the process of putting works orders out for the money that's available. And look, in terms of future years, obviously we don't have a budget for next year yet, but we know from some of the things that we have done, the analysis that we've published over the years, we're unlikely to have anything like the full amount needed to maintain the network. You would take something like 192 million in today's prices. This year, I think our opening baseline was around 90, and the Minister has been able to add to that in year. But that's well short of 192, and I'm not planning to need to spend 192 on this next year. And so there'll always be that longer list of things that could be done if there was money available than we're actually going to have. And that's just part of the challenge, unfortunately, of managing the budget process and the monitoring round process.
Another massive reason to see multi-year budgets coming in, so you give you even more ease to plan, and
I'm
sure we'll all be banging the drum on that one. The Chair talked about the capital bids, and there was information in here about the reduction in spend both in city deals and in the peace plans. I'm just keen to get information around what was reduced and any concerns you have around that.
So no concerns. So as these are large long-term projects, and they can move between financial years. Most of them aren't in construction. None of them are in construction yet. So the big spend comes when you're obviously spending the construction funds. We're still in planning, procurement, preparation, design. there's smaller amounts of money and relatively small changes in the timeline can push spend between years. That's
so we'll not see any of them impacted long term, but that it's just moving money year on. Yeah. Okay, thank you. The final one was just around TransLink, and again I know the chair dived into the resource funding in both that. I think it was £4 million in relation to that. I don't know if we're going to touch on Belfast. We're going to wait to the end, are we?
That's what your question is.
Well, it was around basic capacity, because it's great. Grand Central Station is fantastic, and I know through TransLink advertising campaign that it's important to get as many people on the buses and trains as physically possible. But what certainly we saw, and certainly where I live during Christmas, even with the massive traffic in Belfast, we were urging people on the trains, but they were packed to the rafters with 3 carriages. So I'm asking, is some of that money to try and increase capacity imminently, so that when we're encouraging people to go on the trains and buses, they're A, going, and B, there's spaces on them? Is that what some of that funding's currently identified for, given the urge to get people on there?
In some ways it is, because it's a global picture, so yes. It is. It's been a tough year financially for TransLink in terms of the allocation. So they have done a lot of good work in terms of efficiencies, but also with an eye on service throughout the year. So this funding, if it is successful, will put them in a better financial situation. So that way they can then look at service delivery too. But at this point, there's no big plans in terms of kind of upping the service. But there will be a whole review. We have a PSA with TransLink, so we will review the whole performance. We do it on an ongoing basis, but at year end there'll be a full reflection on this year. And this has been an unusual year, obviously, yes, with the opening of the hub and the shutting down of some of the services. So there definitely will be a review, and I suppose lessons learned around all of that.
That's good to know, because from a PR point of view, it's obviously very important. We're encouraging as many people as possible from the department, from TransLink, from ourselves, to use public transport, but there's nothing more demoralising than when you try to use it that it's not either going or it's not as comfortable as has been advocated. So hopefully that will be seen. That's all for now. Are we going to come back to Belfast?
Yeah, we'll come back. Okay. I think we'll probably leave the traffic issues to the business plan just at the end of that.
No problem. Thanks very much. Appreciate
it. I just wanted to come back. I think the last time you were at committee, we had heard from the Mineral Products Association just before you'd come in, and again just concern around the capital spend for road surfacing projects and what that will mean ultimately on that industry and then our overall economy. So can you give any further hope for that industry themselves, because pausing schemes, that's pretty bleak.
So the clear message from me, we totally understand that is not an optimal way to help contractors run businesses and suppliers run businesses, and we will not rush towards doing that unless we need to, unfortunately. The longer term picture, multi-year budgets help with planning. Other things the department can do can help with planning, and we'll continue to work really closely with the industry, and we understand the challenges that stopping and starting can give them, and we're also very mindful of the need to have a long-term supplier base that can actually supply us with the materials and the works that we need, and we'll do what we can to work with them on that.
Have you had recent engagement with them?
We have as a department, yes. Personally, I haven't seen them in a while, but I know my colleagues are meeting with them regularly, and we have a regular liaison group that continues to meet, and we'll do that.
Do you know when the last time you'd met with them? Just because from their point of view, planning is really, really key for them.
I would need to check to be 100% sure, but I believe it was early December.
Okay, thank you. And then can I just clarify, just in the course of the conversation, I think you talked there about RI borrowing in relation to NI Water and a figure of 100 million. Can I just clarify if that's right?
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry. I was
looking at the draft budget for next year. There's a ring-fenced amount set aside for NI Water, 105.7 million.
Okay. And do you know what that's going to be used for?
So at the moment it's ring-fenced for NI Water, and Minister then will determine if he wanted to ring-fence that any further for anything specific. But that's how it's set out in the draft budget.
Okay, members, was there any other questions? Anybody? Stephen,
thanks,
yeah.
Chair, just to come in terms of the road maintenance issue, Colin, I suppose it's for you. are we still in the position of the limited service? And with this extra money, I know that you're pointing towards multi-year budgets long term. When do you think we can get out of that hole that is, the limited service, which does, have an adverse impact on, everybody right across the country?
Yeah. The short answer is I don't have an immediate plan to remove limited service, unfortunately. The financial position that would support that is always going to be challenging to deliver in the context of all the other pressures that the department has. So, I think we're spending something like 45 million this year on essential maintenance. It would need to be closer to 65 resource to remove limited service, and that's a significant increase. That's a 50% increase, and that's hard to see. Obviously, the Minister will have to weigh that up along with all the other things that he's going to need to do. What we are able to do, and what we did this year, the Minister was able to allocate additional money towards essential maintenance in year, and we were able to make good use of that. The opportunity to do that at this stage of the year is less, but you'll have seen the money in the October monitoring that went towards winter service and gully emptying in terms of winter preparedness. So we are always looking to develop packages of work that can take any funding that is available, so that it's not a if you miss your opportunity to start a year, you can't do anything all year. That's not the case. It'll still remain the case that we're ready to respond at monitoring rounds.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Stephen. Peter.
Thank you, Chair. And I've got a couple of questions, so I'll rattle through these as quickly as I can because I know we're under time pressure. Firstly, Judith, there was a comment that you had made there. So you said at the start that Translink's financial position has improved. I was thinking, why? I'll ask her why. But then you also said it's been a tough year with the allocation. So
it has improved since the second quarter because of the additional funding that came through in the October monitoring. So they got an additional 6.85 million. As well, we work closely with them, and they are constantly focusing on the cost of delivery service. So they have managed to generate a degree of efficiency in there as well, or costs they may be estimated coming in higher have come in slightly lower. So in the main, it is the contribution from the October monitoring which has improved their position between the second quarter and the third quarter.
Okay, thank you. I noticed in the graph, the chart, I think it's still there, 0.5 million for climate action with TransLink. What does that look like in real terms? And is it enough?
Well, that's some additional monies. Those are specifically for some earthworks and drainage resilience work. There already is quite a lot of spend. Climate action tends to be for the zero emission buses or the hydrogen fuel buses. That's where most of that capital money goes, but there are other initiatives by TransLink, which support the whole environment piece. So that's just a small pressure in there around that particular type of work.
Okay, and in terms of Northern Ireland water, I think 39.6 million was allocated in October or earmarked. I think 19.6 of that went direct to Northern Ireland Water. Was there a 20 million or so was there a 20 million or so reallocation that took place, or did the full 39 million go towards addressing the major pressures on Northern Ireland Water in terms of wastewater?
Peter, Northern Ireland Water needed in and around another 39 odd million. We gave them 19.5 million, and that was to be targeted towards improving connectivity to allow housing developments to take shape. So that's what we ended up doing, giving them 19.5 million specifically for that.
Did the Minister say that he had earmarked 39 million or so? Did the Minister say that?
He put the resource and the capital together and talked about the figures that had been given to Northern Ireland Water. So
was resource and capital together?
Yeah.
So the full 39 didn't go towards the wastewater? Am I right in saying that?
Well, you could argue yes, insofar as the resources and staffing and support and all the rest of it. Yeah, but it was a mixture of resource and capital. That announcement.
Okay. BRT2 obviously has been mentioned as well. There was a 5 million, I think, underspend, whatever the phrase would be, for that. And officials have been in previously talking about that, so they've said, there's a large amount of money needed to deliver that project. The 5 million, I think it's you, Colin, had said that to me. The 5 million is sort of in preparation for what could potentially come. Are we still confident that BRT2 is going to go ahead?
Yeah, so look, I know the Minister's actively considering how to get the best value out of the resources that he has for BRT2 at the minute, and as you'll recall, there's a significant shortfall between what the city deal has been able to allocate and what the scheme costs are going to be. So you could be looking at having, I think from memory, it's about 40 million within the city deal, and that can deliver some of the scheme. It's not enough to deliver the full 148 million, but the Minister's trying to decide what's the best use of that 40 million in the short term to allow progress to be made on the scheme and do as much of the work as possible. A lot of the cost of BRT is actually in the operational phase, so you need additional glider vehicles, you need drivers, you need the support and ticketing infrastructure and so on, which you need when the full glider service is operational. There would be infrastructure improvements and bus priority measures and other types of work that we could do to prepare for that, and you can get on with that before you have the full funding. And so I think the Minister's just trying to consider what's the most valuable mix of things that we would pick out of the whole programme and get on with in that context.
Yeah. And we'd received, last question, Chair, we'd received correspondence about 20.7 million has been allocated for active travel this year. The Minister had sent that to the committee, and I'd mentioned to the Chair earlier on that 20.7 million that's been set aside. From an East Belfast perspective, we've seen active travel projects that take a long time to actually happen in terms of the consultation process that needs to take place. So a year or two later, we're still waiting for any sort of cast iron tangible changes to take place in terms of spending that money. The 20.7 we've been told about from the Minister that's been allocated for active travel this year. Are we going to spend 20.7 million this year on active travel, or is that just a lot of money that's going to be reallocated because it takes time to develop these things? So what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. It takes time, and like you, the conversations that we're having are very much focused on when are we going to be able to deliver some of the schemes that are in preparation. So we've got a couple of schemes in Belfast, Montgomery Road and Ravenhill Road in particular. Where, as you say, we're at the consultation stage, and so it's unlikely there's going to be delivery on the ground this year. In terms of the broader allocation for active travel, some of it is being spent through councils for the likes of greenways and upgrades to greenways and so on. I would need to check what the spend profile looks like for the rest of the year, but it's not the case that the money won't be used. As with our major works and with some of our maintenance, it can be pushed into the following year and picked up then. And as I say, we're always ready to take a reallocation of money and make good use of it in year. So all of that money will be well spent.
In terms of Montgomery Road, I think it was December 23 that consultation started. Obviously, it's January 25. So within that 20 million, is it earmarked currently for the things that are going to potentially take place?
So the team will sit down and try and work out what's the real life plan to actually spend and deliver, and they'll allocate the money accordingly. I would need to check and come back to you if I could in terms of how that's broken down.
Thank you.
Okay.
Cheers.
Mark Durkin is joining us online. He's indicated. Mark, are you come in?
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks to the team for coming in. Some of the stuff has been touched on, some clarity given on some of the aspects. Again, we're in a financial situation, and we're in the last quarter of the year, and reference has been made there around how we can run planned projects into the next year, or the payment for them into the next year. And then John made the point around the advantage that multi-year budgets will bring, and while obviously it will bring the advantage of certainty, if you don't have the money, you don't have the money. And it's like if a household's struggling to survive and they're paid weekly, if you move them to a monthly pay cycle, it's definitely not going to get any easier. Now, the point had been made in somewhere that about TransLink's improved financial situation, and I know they got more money in the last monitoring round. But you said that they are constantly focusing on the cost, or improving the cost of the delivery of service. But is DFI doing the same? And I know there's wider issues around procurement, but I just wonder what work has been done within the department to improve efficiency. I look at things like road maintenance, again, where we're always in the position where more money is needed, and every monitoring round, the Minister, whoever they might be, will be bidding for more money for road maintenance. But when I see crew out doing road markings last week, and they do a good job.
Sorry, Mark, if you could just come quickly to your point,
well,
please.
But then there's a street like 20 yards away that needs new road markings, and it's not being done. And there might be the same crew might be back there next month, maybe 2 months' time. What has been done within the department to actually drive down the cost to improve the efficiency of service delivery.
So recognise the problem you're describing, and one of the unintended consequences, I think, of having a limited service policy with a higher intervention threshold is that you find more things not meeting it, and it can lead to a patchy work programme, just as you've described. So we are working on a new maintenance strategy which in part is designed to ensure that where we're intervening on the network, that we're not walking past defects a short distance away, and that we're able to put a better quality of repair in as well. So we're changing the nature of what repair we would instruct for certain types of defect, and subject to the Minister's consideration in due course, that could be part of we hope that will be part of a new maintenance strategy that can set out all of the ways in which we want to deliver a better quality service and maximise the efficiency from the money that we do have available.
Yeah, I was going to, I suppose, laud the sensibilities of an area-based approach to maintenance work. And then winter services, I'd like to commend, I suppose, the efforts of all your colleagues who were out in all sorts of conditions at all hours, trying to ensure our roads were clear last week. But the money that had been allocated for winter services, have you still, I'm fairly sure we haven't seen the last of the bad weather. Have you still enough in the bank for it? And at what point in the financial year do you say, we've still a couple of million sitting there for winter services, but we're out of the woods and out of the winter now, and it can be used to do something else?
Yeah, we do have enough to deliver winter service. The allocation the Minister was able to make following October monitoring has given us the fully funded winter service programme that we needed. In terms of how you balance that, winter service runs right the way through to the end of March, and in fact this year we were gritting in the middle of April, if you may remember. Mm-hmm. So it can even run into the following financial year. The way we manage that, a lot of those costs are in the operational cost of that gritting action, the driver costs, fuel costs, vehicle maintenance costs, and so on. We have our salt stockpile sitting at the start of the winter with a resilience amount in it, so that even in a severe winter we have sufficient stock of salt available. So it's not an issue that will impact us immediately. It's part of our off-season work is to replenish our salt stocks ahead of the following winter. So from a resilience perspective, we're very happy that we'll have what it takes to deliver winter service throughout the rest of this season.
That's reassuring. And sort of like the maintenance thing, though, I wonder, is there any desire or plan to revise criteria or the winter services programme itself to ensure that there isn't anywhere that penny-wise, pound-foolish approach that all departments have been criticised of in the past? Because sometimes when it gets to the stage that it'd be easier to ask for gold dust than it is for grit, and then there's a lot of grit being used on a road because of the number of vehicle movements, but therefore because it's so busy it may actually require less gritting because the vehicles are using it. I don't know, is there any plan to review policies there?
Yeah, so we are actually at the minute carrying out a review of winter service, looking ahead to next winter. So that this winter our plans are set and are adequate for what we need to do. We're conscious always that there are financial pressures and a need for efficiency. We also have pressures from a driver perspective. There are 300 people on standby every night of the year, including Christmas, to deliver winter service. And that's complicated when you look at things like driver's hours regulations, that if someone's working for us during the day doing maintenance on the road network and using up their hours, then they wouldn't be available to drive the gritter that night if the need was to come. So we have to be preventative essentially in ensuring that we protect people's driving ability in terms of the hours that they're able to work. And that pressure isn't likely to go away anytime either. So we are looking at winter service ahead of next year in terms of making sure that it is a sustainable and resilient service so that we can continue to provide the service to the public as we do.
Okay, Mark.
And just is further recruitment part of that plan, and how is recruitment of staff going?
Yeah,
sorry.
So further recruitment is always part of our plan. So yes, we hope to recruit additional industrial workers this year as well, and part of that will be to allow us to deliver all of our winter responsibilities.
Okay, thank you. Just in relation to the review of the winter services, if you could provide that to the committee, you know, at the first available opportunity that you have. That'd be good.
It'll probably take us a few months to do.
Yeah.
It's a sizable piece of work, but yes, absolutely happy to share that with the committee when it's
great. Thank you, because it is a road safety element and concern as well, and when you're looking at the road safety plan as well, and things like that. John, you wanted to come in very briefly in relation to...
Apologies if this isn't topical today, but in the correspondence we got from the Minister, he said he was intending or hopeful of carrying out a review of the Taxi Act 2008, but that was dependent on both staffing and resource. I'm just interested to get a flavour for how much staffing and how much resource would be required. Is that factored into next year's budgets? And topical, you know, Mark mentioned about the staffing. Do we need more staff to do it, or is the staffing complement currently there enough?
Yeah, we've struggled somewhat in terms of filling particularly those policy posts. The good news is there's been quite a bit of movement on the DP and staff officer lists in the civil service, so we're optimistic those posts will be filled fairly soon.
Sounds hopeful.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank you. Look, I don't have anybody else indicating at this moment in time. The only thing to say is there was some information given today that wasn't provided in the written submission to the committee. So if you wouldn't mind just providing some of that extra information today to the committee, just so that we have that obviously when it comes to the Assembly Chamber and things, that we have that quick access to that information, that would be great. And then there may be some further questions as well, but we will come back just in relation to that as well, if that's okay. So I'll now say goodbye to Susan. Thank you for your time today, and we'll move on to item 9, which is the Department for Infrastructure 2024-25 Business Plan Quarter 1 and 2 Monitoring Oral Evidence. At page 274 you'll see the Clerk's Memo, Department for Infrastructure 24-25 Business Plan for Quarter 1, Quarter 2 Monitoring. You'll see at page 278 Minister for Infrastructure Cover Letter. At page 280, Annex A is Quarter 1, Quarter 2 combined, 24-25 Business Plan Monitoring Report, October 2024. And at page 285, you'll see Annex B, Summary Progress Report. So we're welcoming Ciara Lloyd to the committee. I don't think we have met yet, but you're very, very welcome to the committee. Ciara is Director of Corporate Strategy and Performance. So I'm just seeking agreement that the evidence is recorded by Hansard and everybody is content, hopefully. So if you could, again, we have all the information there. I don't know if you want to briefly outline some details for 5 minutes, or if you're happy just to come straight to questions.
I think we'll go, given the time, Chair, we'll go straight into it. But just to say that you do have in your pack, as you rightly say, Chair, up until 30th of September. Obviously, since then, there's been further progress, so we'll be able to update colleagues on that and take any questions on that. So that's all we plan to do, if you're happy enough with that. We're not saying much more at this point. Okay, perfect. Well, look, I'll go straight in. So there, obviously, we just want to check in relation to how the priorities are being monitored and how those are implemented, and of course we recognise on the back of the budget situation that may be difficult in some of the aspects, but I wanted to just look at a few things, and members may pick up on a few of the other actions. So looking at the transport actions, in relation to action 5, it states that it will address the condition of the road network through blessed application of available resources by the 31st of March 2025. So what specific actions are being taken to address the condition of the road network, obviously given the available budget, because as we've just talked about, that's very difficult.
So we have a range of performance measures that sit beneath that corporate target in terms of how our road maintenance colleagues deliver essential maintenance and structural maintenance. So for example, the speed with which we repair different categories of defect, the completion of our grass cutting programme, the completion of gully cleaning programmes and so on. So that corporate target is the aggregate of all of that information, and within that there are areas where we're very comfortable and we're delivering well. There are other areas where we're maybe more amber in terms of the percentage of defects being repaired within the timelines that we set. Sometimes it takes a bit longer to get round them all, unfortunately, and so we're seeing some not critical but some performance issues there that we're paying close attention to and working closely on.
How is that monitored really, because what I may view as being assessing and addressing the condition of the road network in my area might be different to elsewhere, and I'm just, it seems quite broad in terms of addressing the road network within the application of the available resources by March 2025. So what's successful? What does that look like? That you can go, right, that's green, that's actioned?
Yeah, so I'll give you a couple of examples. We have an IT system that records all of the data around defects and the repairs and so on, and that's where I get the performance management information from. So, for example, for the category of road defects that we call an R1, which is one of the more serious categories, we have a target to repair or make safe at least 94% of those by the end of the day following its identification, so that's within 24 hours roughly, and we have a range of targets like that. So to complete a clean of all gullies at least once during the year is another one of the performance measures within that, and I appreciate your point. It is a broad aggregated target at corporate level, but we drill right down into that. The Director of Maintenance, Colin Sykes, and Divisional Roads Managers and others are paying close attention to what's going on in different parts of the network, broken down by section, office area, as you would appreciate, and that's how we form our judgment on that higher level target.
Okay, and then in terms of Action 7, it specifies that it will review our major roads projects prioritisation by the 31st of August 2024 and publish detail of the resulting capital programme, but it's delayed due to ongoing work priorities within the Transport Road Asset Management. So what are these priorities that have caused slippage on that action?
So, for example, it's the same team that manage our city and growth deal projects, and there was an awful lot of work in the autumn, as you'll recall, to deal with some of the announcements that were made around city deals, and a number of those projects are progressing through the different parts of the statutory process as well, and indeed the A5 was part of the reason. So the Minister has a submission with him at the moment. He's considering what he wants to do in terms of the prioritisation of the different major roads projects, and I know he hopes to make an announcement on that in the coming weeks. Okay,
so that's a current status then. Do you have a specific date in relation to that objective now updated?
It'll really be up to the Minister at this stage when he's minded to make his decision.
Okay. Okay, fair enough. And then in relation to the water actions, Action 11, we're very keen in terms of getting the water, flooding and sustainable drainage bill to the committee to get our teeth stuck into that, and it gives a date of the 31st of March 2025. So I'm just interested to know what is the current position on the timing of the bill's introduction.
So what we're hoping to do is, as you say, bring it forward in the spring of this year. There's a lot of work going on behind the scenes at the moment. We're working closely with our colleagues in OLC. So there's a lot of drafting going on at the moment, but we are putting a lot of effort behind that to try and get it moved forward as quickly as possible. So absolutely, when we're ready to bring it to the committee, we will do that, and we're targeting to come before the end of the financial year. Spring 2025 is the term we're using, but the end of financial year is what we're hoping at the latest.
Okay, so that's maybe slipped a wee bit then from that March.
It slipped insofar as the last couple of weeks we've just been working forward and back trying to get the drafting where we need it to be. So it hasn't slipped massively, but there's just a lot of work involved in it, and it's just slipping by a few weeks. But we're still hoping to bring it to you sooner rather than later is the hope, and we're devoting time and effort to that.
Okay, because it is going to be quite a substantial bill.
Absolutely. I mean, it looks at giving more powers for Northern Water and hose pipes, flood owners, suds. All of that's going to be covered. So it's a very good bill, and it's something we want to make sure happens very quickly. Yeah.
Okay. I just want to check, Deputy Chair, do you want to come in?
When you're rising out of that around the refurbishment, the opening of Consultation and the refurbishment of York Street, just given obviously the what we did see over Christmas and the traffic chaos, for want of a better term, what's been learned from that in terms of the experiences, the impact of the closures, everything that went with that, going forward for future projects and how we manage traffic? I know, Colin, and hats off to you for that elongated interview you did with Mr. Nolan, because I think you covered a lot and you set out a lot of the issues that are there. But I'm just curious from a department's point of view of traffic management, what we've learnt in terms of how we manage our infrastructure projects and how we try and satisfy the public's urge to continue to use traffic or cars in the city centre.
Yeah, I could probably need a little bit more time than we have available to answer that.
I think it's have a conference on it.
Don't build things in Belfast city centre would be one lesson that you can learn, but that's not an appropriate one at all. And certainly the value of the investment can be seen in some of the public transport figures. I think in terms of managing the traffic, the engineers that we have in the department have an awful lot of experience of this. We have decades of experience in the team, and unfortunately that doesn't mean that you can conjure up solutions when the space is finite and the number of vehicles that needs to use it exceeds its capacity. So it is about trying to be intelligent about the changes that we make, and it's also about trying to engage appropriately with all of the people who use the streets in Belfast and in other parts of the network, in terms of businesses and commuters and everybody else, to ensure that we have a vision for the city centre transport network that supports the economic aspirations of the city and the people who need to come in and use it for retail and for business and for work and everything else. And that can be done effectively. So certainly some of the engagement that we've had with businesses and business representatives has been really helpful over the last couple of months, and that's something we hope to build on in the future as well. Okay,
and just in terms of the outstanding then works that are ongoing, are we on track to see the completion of each of those works and for streets to start opening up again as this quarter progresses, or are there any concerns that you have about delays?
No specific concerns about delays, although Durham Street is due to be closed for a total of a year, so it's not a quarter one of 2025 resolution. Yes. But no particular concerns.
The refurbishment of York Street or York Street Station, for example, in that quarter, I think it's to be done by this quarter.
So it is opened already. So York Street is.
Yeah. There's some ongoing works, but the station is up and running. It opened in April last year.
Okay, but in terms of any other works that are going on in this term, there's no concerns about delays?
There's an awful lot of work going on the network at the minute, and a lot of essential work as well. Yes. Every one of those interventions has a very important reason why it's being done, whether it's safety or expanding the gas network or relining sewers that are in poor condition. All of these things unfortunately have to happen, so I can't sit here and say that there would be no more traffic congestion. We're still doing works on the Sydney bypass, for example, and that will have an impact on people who need to come in to the city from North Down in particular. But we will continue to manage that as best we can and ensure that we give people choices and information about how to plan their journeys.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. And I think your last point was going to be my first point, so we'll crack on then. Action 14 regarding the flood forecasting system. Just what is the current what is the current timescale for that business case? That's an important one.
So a slight delay on the development of that, but we're still on schedule to have it done by we're hoping February to have the business case done. And what we've been doing is very much trying to see best practice out there. We've engaged with 4 Nations, we've engaged with our resilience groups, etc., just to make sure that whatever way we design this, we design it and do it right. And so while it might have slipped a couple of weeks, I think it's been time well spent to make sure that we land this as well as possible. So the business case is on schedule. It'll be done within probably the next 6 weeks or so.
Okay, thank you. And then action 8, the active travel delivery plan, not published until 30th November, given the specified target date was not met. Why was this categorised as delayed rather than not achieved? If you get my meaning?
Well, it is now achieved.
Is it now achieved?
Not achieved wouldn't have been the appropriate. Okay. So typically when there's a short delay like that, I mean, I think it was a delay of about 6 weeks from the target we set ourselves at the start of the year to when it actually happened. Some of that was just down to logistics and getting the right date.
An inbuilt grace period then?
Yeah, that's one way you could describe it, yeah. It is achieved. The consultation's out there now, so we're very happy about that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Keith.
Okay, thanks for coming along. My question's relating to action point 10, the whole wastewater connection stuff, right? And I appreciate that one's delayed, and I appreciate that was back in the last year. But more broadly, I suppose the question is, you're showing here resource limit of pressure of 23 million, okay, but my suppose question is broadly, what work are you guys doing to talk to NI Water and NIA? You with me? Because whenever a developer goes to build one house or 20 houses, he or she gets caught in the NI Water and NIA trap. So what are you doing to communicate with both those? And I appreciate NIA, police, NI Water to a degree, but what are you doing to try and bring those to come to some solution? Because to just say no, we've had this conversation, no more houses is not an answer. So what are you doing to bridge the gap between NI Water and NIA to come with solutions innovatively across NI? And that it's not just a no.
Okay, so what NI Water have established is what's called a Development Constraints Project Team, and what we're trying to do there, what Northern Water are trying to do there, is engage with all the players to make sure that everyone's alive to what is possible, what are the challenges, and to try and work through it. The Northern Water, rightly and understandably, will say, engage early as you can with us, and let's see where we get to on that. So there is that active live discussion that's ongoing. On a more wider strategic point, we are looking within the department about what we can bring to the table and how we can help this, and certainly in recent weeks, and as recently as before Christmas, Minister asked me to meet with colleagues in the Department for Communities and DERA, NIEA and Housing Executive, and just have an exploratory chat about how we can help the process and look at where the barriers are, but also look at where the opportunities are. So that piece of work has started to kick off. It's been very good and very engaging conversation. There's certainly my experience, and I'm sure Ciara would say the same, there's a real can-do attitude around that table to see how we can make this work. The other layer that I will add into that is that because Northern Water didn't get the full amount of money that they needed for this financial year, what they've been asked to do is to develop a reasoned submission which looks at what is the art of the possible, and to work with ourselves, utility regulator and the NIA. So on a number of levels, Keith, there is that ongoing discussion. There is the Developer Constraints Forum, there is the discussions we're having with government departments, and then there is that ongoing work between ourselves, Northern Water, Environment Agency, Utility Regulator about what is the art of the possible. So hopefully that will start.
One question to follow on that. So there's not going to be money available tomorrow to solve all these problems. We appreciate that. And NI Water is not accepting, I think it's a 161, it's an Article 161 they don't accept, right? So have you looked at about any insurance cover? So a developer builds 10 houses or 20 houses, and there's a nervousness if that developer goes bust, who maintains or services the local treatment plant? NI Water won't accept those treatment plants. So is there any method of ensuring that to some degree, that if the developer goes bust, there's still an insurance policy to cover and maintain that treatment plant? Because they're saying no. So what have you looked at to solve that problem? Because we're not going to get money tomorrow to solve all this development issues. It's not happening. So what other options is there?
Yeah, well, you'll have heard our Minister talk about his three-pronged approach, which is where he is going to continually work with the executive to try and get more money. I appreciate that's going to take time if it all happens, but he is going to do that. Alongside that, he's looking at natural water solutions, and he's also looking at how we can work with developers, and that's the piece of work that Ciara is going to be involved in with me over the coming weeks, to look at how developers can contribute to this. We haven't looked specifically at the idea of some kind of insurance thing. I mean, I know, and you're right to say, Keith, that you're hearing that Article 161s, but in our conversation with Northern Water, that's not a blanket no. They will obviously work with developers.
They're not accepting new treatment plants.
Yeah.
They're not taking them on.
Yeah, at the moment, and that's a symptom of not having enough funding. But what we're trying to do is unlock that and see where we can. I'm
not disagreeing. I don't think it's a symptom of no funding. I think it's a symptom of they're saying no. They don't need funding to accept it.
Yeah.
They don't need money to accept it. They need reassurance that it's not going to cause a problem down the future, and I can understand that. Yeah. But having no money is not the reason for that.
I think there's a kind of thought process that all of us have to go through, Northern Water, ourselves, the department, and the developers, etc. That there's a sense, there's a nervousness about liabilities down the line, and so what we're trying to do is take away that fear, because if that doesn't, if no one reaches out and starts that, nobody's going to start it, and so we have to look at some way that everybody can pull together and be reassured that this is a process. But specifically on your question of insurance, no, that isn't something we're looking at specifically at this point. What we're trying to do is get that goodwill working together to try and identify where we can solve it and try and get working together rather than put anything specific in at this point. But that doesn't preclude us from doing that down the line.
Well, that's fine, and I appreciate Article 10. That's a running that's not going to be over overnight. That's going to go on for a long period of time. Thank you. Appreciate that.
And I declare an interest in relation to my unadopted development bill, private members bill. Cahill.
Thanks, Chair. And thanks very much for your answer so far. I want to go back to this issue. I mean, you know, the utility regulator signed off on the 2.5 billion product PC21, and it's focused on wastewater treatment mostly. And I know here on this article here saying water treatment, which is fine, but just to follow on from Keith, I mean, I want the conversation to move to the next phase when you're having that conversation. It's about wastewater facility and connections. That's what it's about. That's where the focus should lie. And I appreciate, because I was going to ask about stakeholders, but you've mentioned who the stakeholders are, and they have a part to play. But the responsibility to deliver wastewater treatment and to build homes and develop. That's what it's about. So I would like the next time you have the conversations in the room is to stick to the PC21, which is agreed, because we've had the utility regulator, we're hearing all about Article 61s and all of those arguments, and Keith mentioned insurance. From the way I look at it, it's about wastewater treatment, infrastructure, and that's what the PC21 was about. So on other elements, but I'd appreciate
drinking water being a primary one of that.
It is in a way, but drinking water has been part of the PC programme from the very start. It's gone on 17 years or more. So do you understand where I'm coming from? So
yeah. I mean, not to delay colleagues, but you know, the price control has a range of commitments has to be done. That's the maintenance, that's the capital works, that's the works identified by the utility. So there's a range of things that Northern Water have to try and cut their cloth to deliver. But I get your point, Keith.
You get the point, but I just want to raise that point, Sharon.
Okay.
Keith's covered. Thank you.
Thank you. Just in terms of the planning actions, there's obviously quite an awful lot of external stakeholders that need to be involved in that process, which can obviously and ultimately lead to delays then. So what's the overall impact then upon, say for example, the planning improvement programme as a result of having those external stakeholders?
Okay, I can update you on that, definitely. In terms of planning improvement programme, there were 40 actions, and you know, you'll see through the feedback on the business plan that I think 13 have been achieved, 5 are on target, but there is the kind of dependency on the councils, also the Planning and Appeals Commission are all involved in it. So what we have done over the last number of months, and fully supported by the Minister, is to take a whole kind of a reset and a refocus around the planning improvement programme. And I suppose what's really important in all of this is kind of the relationship with the councils. So at the moment, we are doing a series of visits out to councils and just, you know, having a conversation in terms of what's working well, what's not working well, and how we work together better around the whole objectives in terms of improving the planning process. There's obviously things underway as well. We have the legislation through for the validation checklists, which will be really important, and that's due to come into force from 1st of April this year. And you know, that's all about quality of applications, in that if you get a good application in, then that will help in terms of getting it through the system. We've also done a lot of work with our statutory consultees. There's a statutory consultee forum and a lot of engagement around that. And we're also doing a lot of kind of data analysis around times and trying to understand where blockages are in the system. So there's, as I say, there's a whole reset and refocus piece in place. The other thing as well, we just acknowledge, is resources and staff. And part of that is just in terms of giving our staff the resilience. Being a planner is a tough job, so it is. There's a lot of bad press, and you know, you're in a no-win situation, in that there's always one happy party and one unhappy party, or many unhappy parties. And the other thing as well is we want to try and encourage, not just within the department, but across all the councils, to encourage people into the profession and try and kind of bulk up the profession. There's quite a bit of succession planning, you know, people moving on. So there's a whole piece around kind of, you know, we talked about resources, employing people, getting people into the profession, looking at things like apprenticeships, which have worked well with our engineering colleagues, and also providing the support in terms of training, etc. As well, there's a whole stakeholder piece, beyond it, be it agents and different firms and obviously developers and people like that. So I suppose we're looking at the big picture around that. We're looking at as much as possible collaborative dialogue around that, and we're also focusing in on people. So with that, we plan to do a whole reset of the Planning Improvement Programme over the next couple of months. I know that Rosemary Daly is up with you at the end of the month, so she'll be able to give you a lot more detail and information on that.
Okay, that's perfect, thank you. I just want to now go back to some of the traffic issues, Colin. In our pack today, we do have information from the round table from Monday the 16th of December. And I know it's been talked about in the news as well, but it has talked about the comparison between November 23 to December 24 in terms of journey times. Why is it November 23 and not the same period, say 5th of December? I think the 12th of December was the other one, comparison date for the 2023.
So we have the ability to produce those different comparisons. I guess what we decided to do was when we started some of the work that we were doing, we needed to take a fixed point of reference, and we needed to give ourselves the ability to compare to a fixed point of reference, and we went with November 23 because we were in November at that point, and also it was just before some of the mitigations that we put into the road network in the city centre to accommodate the construction works for Belfast Grand Central Station were in. So we picked a point before that where we deemed that was a more normal traffic environment, and we were trying to compare back to before some of the interventions went in and give ourselves that baseline, as I say.
Okay, fair enough. We have asked for more information anyway in relation, just further detail in relation to some of those roundtable and stakeholder events that happened just before Christmas, just to get some more information. Today there is an emergence story in relation to the Boyne Bridge and the planning issues around that, and I'm just reading here. There's some media organisations I don't listen to in the morning, but I am going to say that in relation to this particular issue, this is important, because you've referenced that you don't think you had any traffic concerns coming up, but in relation to this letter that has been given, it says that no work is to start until there is a viable traffic plan in place. To me, that seems like there is going to be a delay. Can you talk to that today?
So obviously the department is the planning authority for this, and then we have our statutory roads authority responsibilities as well. What I can say is that we're continuing to work hard on the discharge of the planning conditions in order that Translink can proceed with their works. There's a programme of work, as I say. Durham Street is due to be closed for a year. So there's no immediate change to any traffic position. The traffic position largely is as a result of Durham Street being closed, and that's a slightly separate, albeit it's obviously very related, but it's not quite the same issue as the works on the road itself. Once the road closure is in place, we've put in place mitigations to cope with as best we can with the traffic mitigation on the road network around that, and that remains the case.
So you believe that there is a viable traffic plan in place, that this work can then resume, and when will it resume?
Well, I'm afraid I don't have any answers on Translink's programme.
Yeah, I mean, it's ultimately kind of a planning decision, so evidence is sought from roads as a statutory consultee on that matter, so it's in transit at the moment. To date there have been no decisions made on that.
Okay, when do you expect, because I mean for the city centre this will be a concern, and obviously we've heard before Christmas in terms of the Sandy Row residents and the businesses that are connected there. We don't want to see any delay in relation to the project, and if there are concerns, if there needs to be a refocus, that needs to happen as soon as possible in relation to this. And I suppose people hearing this news today will be very, very concerned in relation to what this might mean for them and for, in terms of the project as well going forward, if you understand me.
Look, in terms of the detail of the programme of the project, I'm afraid TransLink would have to tell you what the detail of that programme is. We're working, as Judith has said, on the planning conditions from our statutory responsibilities, and then we'll put on our road network hat again and engage with TransLink on the opportunities to accelerate the programme and all the rest of it in order to relieve some of the traffic issues as quickly as we can.
So will you be meeting with TransLink in relation to this issue then?
We meet regularly with TransLink on this, so I think some of our teams are in almost daily contact with TransLink from a programme management perspective, and then obviously we have to try and keep that separate from the discharge of statutory responsibilities around planning and street works licences and so on, where we are the statutory authority as well as a delivery partner.
Okay. Members, is there any other questions or points? Stephen, sorry,
on this
I did
issue,
have you down, sorry.
Just a couple of ones, thanks, Chair. I appreciate the challenges around it, but I think it's important to say traffic congestion isn't just for Christmas. And I think in Belfast, obviously this Christmas we had an exceptionally high number of vehicles and so on, and it was a number of factors. But has there been any consideration given to tidal flow lanes? I know that was something was mentioned by the FSB and others in recent months, which is in operation in a number of other places in the UK, particularly for short, bottlenecks. Is that something that's on the agenda or radars anywhere?
It's on the radar. Certainly we're aware that it's used in other places, and we very, very briefly, and I don't mean in any serious way, but we briefly considered whether we had the opportunity before Christmas to look at something like that. Unfortunately, the density of the network in Belfast city centre makes it very difficult, given that many people are using the city centre as a transit route to somewhere else. So identifying one particular stretch of road that you could use because enough people want to use it to go in the same direction essentially is very challenging, and certainly in the time available we didn't think that was something that we could take any further. I think there are opportunities in the medium to long term looking at the transport network in Belfast and in the city centre to think about how we want it to operate, and that's where consideration of new measures like that would come, along with all the other consideration of how to use the fixed width of the road that we have.
Yeah, I think it's important. It's not just a seasonal thing, all year round, but probably the darker nights it does seem to build up. Certainly from September on in late 24, it seemed to really magnify itself. Just one other thing, and you mentioned it briefly, the Sydenham bypass. Obviously, that has been a contributing factor as well. I think it is what's done so far is excellent. Certainly for the tens of thousands North Down residents that use it daily, it is a great improvement. But just keen to know where we are. I know we're quite far on, certainly from the naked eye from myself, but are we on target for completion? And just a wee bit more. I know last weekend works were suspended by the frost.
Yeah.
Is it the plan to continue the weekend closures and so on?
Yes, so there are 4 further weekend closures needed to complete the work.
Okay.
And that's in addition to the continuous closures overnight that we have.
Yeah.
So we're doing as much of that work overnight as we can, but we do need that full closure, particularly for resurfacing components of the work. So there are 4 further closures. There was to be a closure last weekend, but you're right, because of the weather, it wasn't practical to do the work. So there's a weather-dependent caveat to all of this going forward as to when that would happen, but we'll be making it very clear through the Traffic Watch NI website and all of our communications channels what people should expect. And I know that people will have had some experience of this before Christmas, before the embargo came in, and we'll certainly be doing what we can to highlight the alternative routes that people have available to them.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think the overnight weeknights is a good option, after 10 o'clock when it's very much off peak.
We do as much of that as we can,
Yeah.
mindful that there are residential communities along the Sydenham bypass as well,
Yeah.
and obviously there's a trade-off there in terms of noise.
Just so completion date then is when?
Sorry, I'd have to go away and check. Given the closure last week,
but it's
I'm not sure. I have 4 further weekend closures, and that would essentially be the work.
Well, that'll be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter?
Thank you, Chair. You've actually triggered something with me there, Stephen. You mentioned about the overnight work. I remember a number of years ago work being done at Parkway in East Belfast, and a number of residents saying that overnight work just kept them up all night. Was that ever explored as an option?
So Sydney Bypass is closed every night at the minute because we are doing nighttime work, but exactly what work you do, we try and the contractor obviously tries to balance the impact that would have on people who live nearby. There's a continual balance there. There are always these competing needs and preferences and priorities. We try and work out a programme that gives us the best balance.
And then in terms of the Minister had said about taxis being able to access some of the bus lanes around that Christmas period, I'm assuming that's ended now, but do we also have any data in terms of the impact that had, either positive or negative?
So that's still the case. The taxis are still permitted to use those bus lanes, and I think this week we have advertised an experimental traffic scheme to run and gather the data that we would need to take an informed decision on the future of that particular initiative. That's been advertised this week. It's a statutory process, so we're now at the stage of inviting comments and consultation from the public on what is proposed, and then the intention is to use the experimental scheme to develop a robust evidence base that can inform decisions for the future.
Pilot that he mentioned previously?
So the Minister asked us to bring the scheme in advance of Christmas, given the potential that it had to make some contribution to traffic congestion by reallocating vehicles from one lane to another, essentially, and trying to ease the total pressure. So that was done under temporary legislation. The experimental scheme is a more medium-term scheme. I don't know that, I can't recall off the top of my head the exact length of time that we intended to be in place. There was a previous scheme run for about 12 weeks, and I think our intention would be to run it for longer than that to try and develop more of a robust evidence base. The issues with traffic, as you'll appreciate, traffic today or at this time of the day or round the corner here or round the corner there can be very different, and so it can be challenging to develop an evidence base that can be used for future decisions. So something like an experimental traffic scheme, as the legislation has designed it for, allows us to do something like this on a basis that is experimental and it's temporary, and the point of it is then to gather the evidence.
What roads does that medium scheme include? Is it an extension? Is there further roads included, or is it?
From memory, we are consulting on a broader range of bus lanes within the city centre, but it is still city centre in Belfast. And I say broader, I mean round the corner and down Wellington Place and round the back of City Hall. It's not the full network by any stretch. But that's one issue where if I had known that was going to be asked, I would have had that consultation in front of me, and I'm afraid I don't today.
Yeah.
So.
And I recognise, Colin, we are putting you on the spot today,
No,
and
okay.
I appreciate the fact
consultation's
that you...
out, so it's on our website.
Yeah.
I just don't want to be sitting looking at my screen when I'm trying to answer your questions.
Of course. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Colin, for taking those questions, because you weren't up here today to deal with those questions, and I'm sorry that we have taken advantage of the fact that you are up here today, but I do appreciate the fact that you have tried to answer some of our questions today, because these issues are not easy, they're not easily solved, and it takes all of us to play our part in relation to making sure that they are resolved. So look, I appreciate that, and to all that were here today, I appreciate your time today to the committee. We may follow up, and I think there was some points just to follow back up with the committee just in relation to as well. So look, thank you for your time today, we really do appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, folks, I think we chatted about it there at the very start of the meeting, but I think we'd be very, very keen to have TransLink in here ASAP to try and scope out what's happening there in relation to those issues and indeed the emerging story that's happening today. So our members agreed that we get TransLink up here as soon as possible to try and talk to them about this specifically, and also to talk about the traffic issues that were happening in and around Belfast and the capacity as well of the network. Are members content with that? Yeah.
Chair. Is there any way, Chair, as well, Colin referred to the ongoing daily correspondence between the Department and TransLink, to get a real-time picture just at the current, because this is a real pinch point. You talked about even a weekly update as to where things are at, so that we are briefed, because we're getting asked the questions and we're often in the dark.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, from our perspective, we are not road engineers
Absolutely
either. And we are here as a scrutiny role.
Correct.
Not here just solely to, we're not here ultimately to provide the solutions. We're here to scrutinise what the department does in relation to each plan and policy that goes out. So I think that would be very, very useful to have as well. Any other comments? anything on the business plan that people want to go back to? Are you okay?
Chair, sorry.
Yeah.
It'd be good to get an understanding what the department's doing. We talked about this NI Water and NIA. What are they doing over above to put pressure on NI Water to come up with solutions? Because the tail can't wag the dog.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. So it'd be good to get. I don't know what I'm actually asking there, but it'd be good to get an understanding what the department is saying to NI Water and NIA.
I understand where you're coming from in relation to that, but I think what might be, instead of letters going off for letters' sake at this moment in time, then we'll have to come back once we hear further evidence. I think it might be good if we hold that to see when NIA come, because there may be further points out of that, you know, in terms of that cross-departmental working as well between.
I don't disagree with it, but okay, we get information from NI Water and we get information from NIA. Let's say it's the same day or another day, okay? But who above them is making those two come together and say, provide a solution, you guys, use the experts?
Yes.
That's my point.
Yes, and I totally take that point, Keith. Yeah. But what I'm saying is, just whenever we have NIA in front of us, potentially, when that comes, or when we have that written evidence that comes to committee, it may inform us more.
Fair enough, yeah.
In terms of that linkage that is between the two departments. Does that make sense?
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Right, folks, we have 15 minutes to rattle through this. So let's do this, and
you chair.
Thank you. I will get my speed reading on. So item 10 is Living with Water in Derry, Londonderry Plan Consultation Department for Infrastructure Written Evidence. At page 287 you'll see the Living with Water in Derry, Londonderry Plan Consultation Department for Infrastructure Written Evidence. Inform members that the consultation launched on the 13th of January 2025 will run for a 12-week period, and I'm seeking agreement to note the consultation and schedule forward evidence at a suitable time in the forward work programme upon the conclusion and receipt of the consultation report. Agreed? Item 11 is review of Trustport's public consultation, Department for Infrastructure Written Evidence. At page 347 you'll see the review of the Port's public consultation, Department for Infrastructure Written Evidence. I remind members that the committee has previously received oral evidence from departmental officials, and I'm seeking agreement to note the consultation and schedule forward evidence at a suitable time in the forward work programme upon conclusion and receipt of the consultation report. Agreed? Item 12 is SL1, the Sydenham Bypass Belfast Stopping Up Order, Northern Ireland 2025. At page 385 you'll see the SL1 proposal for the statutory rule. The rule will be subject to negative resolution procedure. The purpose of the rule is to stop up 2 lengths of Sydenham Bypass Belfast at the turning pocket on the country-bound carriageway opposite the entrance to Belfast Yacht Club and former, now emergency, entrance to to George Best Belfast City Airport. One stopping up will be on the northwest side of the city-bound carriageway for a distance of 57.5 metres, and the other stopping up will be on the southeast side of the country-bound carriage for a distance of 10.5 metres. The turning pocket will be closed off by extending the central reservation barriers on both sides using raised curbs. The existing hard surface will be broken up and grassed over. The proposal has been requested by Tram Eastern Division officials for road safety purposes. The stopping ups will prevent access to the turning pocket for motorists travelling on the city-bound carriageway, preventing them from turning right across oncoming country-bound carriageway traffic. Access to Belfast Yacht Club and the emergency entrance to the airport from the country-bound carriage will not be affected. Having consulted upon the proposal, 4 objections were received, 3 which were subsequently withdrawn. The remaining objection referenced the need for road users to drive onwards and turn at D Street and was subsequently considered and responded to by the department. So I just wanted to clarify the 3 objections, what they related to and why they were withdrawn, just to check. Could be taxi industry, So I just wanted to clarify and just check that if members are content. So I'm asking members, are you content with the proposal for the statutory rule?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then item 13 is SL1, the U8017 unnamed road off Red Rock Road, Market Hill Abandonment Order, Northern Ireland 2025. At page 390, you'll see the SL1 proposal for the statutory rule. The rule will be subject to negative resolution procedure. The purpose of the rule is to abandon an area of 3,163 square metres of the U8017 unnamed road, commencing at its junction with Red Rock Road, Market Hill, and continuing for a distance of 373 metres in a north-easterly direction. The abandonment has been requested by Tram Southern Division as the road has collapsed into the adjacent Coots Quarry, and an alternative route has been already constructed. The bed and soil of the area to be abandoned is owned by the registered owners of the quarry, and following the abandonment, the land will revert to and become the responsibility of the registered landowners. Are members content with the proposal for the statutory rule? Yeah. Content? Okay, thank you. Item 14 is subordinate legislation. SR is not subject to assembly procedure. Advise members that there are 2 statutory rules that are not subject to assembly proceedings and are not required to be laid. These are pages 394 to 406 of the meeting pack and are the SR 2024-220, the Parking and Waiting Restrictions Belfast Amendment Number 2 Order, Northern Ireland 2024, and the SR 2024-221, Parking and Waiting Restrictions 5 Mile Town Order, Northern Ireland 2024. My members of the committee noted the proposals for the statutory rules at its meeting on the 11th of December 2024. I'm asking members if they're content to note the statutory rules. Yep. Content, yeah. Okay, item 15 is subordinate legislation SL1 not subject to assembly procedure. Advise members that there are 2 proposals, SL1 for statutory rules that are not subject to assembly proceedings and are not required to be laid. These are listed from pages 407 to 412 and are the SL1, the Parking Places Disabled Persons Vehicles Amendment Number 6 Order, Northern Ireland 2024, and the SL1, the Parking and Waiting Restrictions Derry, Londonderry Amendment Order, Northern Ireland 2025. Ask members if they have any issues they wish to raise on the proposals. All okay? Okay, ask members if they're content. I'm asking members if you're content to with the proposals for the statutory rules, yeah? Okay, item 16 is a forward work programme. At page 413 is a draft forward work programme. So obviously we've talked today about the response from the Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, the Minister, and we were hoping obviously to have NIEA in. So on the back of that, obviously we talked today about the fact that we want TransLink in as soon as possible, so we'll try and get that scheduled ASAP, and obviously the committee then will be aware of that, but it might also be in the committee's interest to hear briefings in relation to the review of the residence parking from the Department of Infrastructure, and then also a briefing from the Assembly Research team regarding the compensation for agriculture landowners affected by the construction of the A5, because I know that we talked about that in relation to the joint meeting that we had with the Agriculture Committee, and it just might be interesting to know, not just in the context of A5 but in the construction of any new road I suppose that's happening in Northern Ireland, in the context of that for landowners, if you're content with that. If there's anything else members want to raise. Okay, so I'm seeking agreement then to proceed with the evidence sessions as set out in the draft forward work programme and to reflect any decisions taken today. Item 17 is any other business. Peter, you had raised there about the active travel. Were you content, or there were some things he needed to come back to you on? Yeah. Do you want to write?
I think it might be helpful just to write as a committee. I mean,
yeah.
I'm not sure in terms of coming back specifically to me, so it might be easier for him as like a memory aid if he's going to feed into that. So
do you want to write to the Minister specifically?
Yeah,
because that was you're happy enough. Okay. Okay, any other items anybody wants to raise? Okay, so thank you, members. The date, time and location of the next meeting is 10 a.m. Wednesday the 22nd of January 2025 in room 29 Parliament Buildings. So thank you everybody for today, and I now adjourn the meeting. Oh, sorry, Mark.
No. Sorry, it was just in terms of, and I know you'd sought further detail when we learned that the winter services programme is going to be reviewed. If we could correspond with the department or the minister or whoever, just to ensure that that review isn't just DFI reviewing DFI, if you know what I mean. And I don't mean this that you want someone else to come in and be more critical, but if there are to be revisions to criteria or the policy approach to winter services, they can only be strengthened by input from other organisations and agencies, who might have a better idea of what places are most vulnerable to adverse winter weather and where most people maybe or where most vulnerable people are, just to help them in those considerations.
Yeah, Mark, I suppose, yeah, I agree with you. Just, I suppose that's in relation to the quality impact assessments in terms of it. But all,
not even necessarily, because any equality impact assessment will be done on a new policy that they come up with. But in terms of actually designing, like they say, oh, we'll only provide grit boxes where the gradient is X,
yeah,
or something like that, rather than where there's 50% of the people in that street who rely on domiciliary carers coming in and things like that. It's just to actually get a better policy position.
Yeah, so I suppose before that, I was also going to say in relation to asking around whether it will be subject to any consultation, I suppose, on a wider scale as well, if there are to be any policy changes in relation to it, just to clarify that. Is it, yeah? Yeah.
Who and how they engage.
Yeah.
With.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, members. That was just in the nick of time there, Mark, so thank you for that. Right, members, safe home. Thank you, and I now adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.